All right, guys, let's get this party started. We we got a video here from the Right Opinion. It's about Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil Philmond. I don't know. Anyway, it's called The Dangers of Dr. Phil, a daytime tragedy, the Right Opinion. Yeah, man, there's been a lot of speech about Dr. Phil as he's not being a great guy. We saw Bad Barbie, Bad Baby, one of those bad people. She talked about how she had a really bad interaction with Dr. Phil. I don't think people took her particularly seriously because she's I guess she struggles to communicate. People probably don't take her that seriously. I'm probably one of the people in that category. But she did something really cool. She had like that whole the school sponsorship thing. Anyway, that's not what this is about. Let's just get this started. Let's get this started. Dr. Philorino. Friendship is based upon confidence. How many climate All right. Edited by Vic Games. Okay.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. And mainstream TV, a contraption that, contrary to beliefs held by many netizens, people do actually still watch.
Yeah,
Sharks,
true.
Advanced sports technology is at the forefront of a new sport that's sweeping the entire nation like a tidal wave. Sharks, this is the National Association of Bubble Soccer.
What is you could tell that this is one of those things that's on TV that like they're on Shark Tank, but they're not on Shark Tank for anything significant. Like they're just on Shark Tank so that they can promote their whatever BS that they have. You know what I mean? Like there are people who go on there just so that they can advertise their stuff. They don't really have a plan on actually getting bought out or anything. That seems like one of them.
It's not a necessity in modern-day society. With the rise of online content and stream platforms, you can obtain your daily dose of entertainment from a variety of sources. Yet, although audiences have certainly been spoiled with an abundance of TV series and films, many live shows have still predominantly remained on broadcast television. Well, at least more than others. These include game shows, news programs, and of course today's genre that has launched so many successful careers, talk shows.
You know what I heard, guys? Don't tell anybody about this, though. I heard Dr. Phil's not even a real doctor. I don't want to be sued for defamation or anything, but that's just what I heard. Okay.
Bartier-Carty.
Yeah, I named it Bartier-Carty. You want to say because I don't want Cartier to sue me.
What's happening right now?
Featuring 21 Savage. Okay.
Now, this isn't to say they don't have their online counterparts, but I think like other shows that retain most of their audience from live TV broadcasts, there is something about watching that sort of content in the moment as it often operates within a very brief window into the spirit of that specific era. If you went back and tried to watch an episode of Oprah from 1992, you probably find it hasn't dated the best. I mean, sometimes these episodes are dated by the time they're released.
Bro, there's an Oprah show where they're talking about like black issues, and they got some white people saying the N-word, dude. It was crazy. It's nuts. Oh, this is never dated.
I digress, though. To give them their credit, they have fought hard for their place on the TV guide, and they do provide people with content that can keep them in touch with the world around them through a medium that may be more digestible than the traditional outlets. With this in mind, there aren't too many set rules.
Where's the Wendy Williams representation? She's a savage. She's crazy, dude.
For creating a successful talk show. The first rule is that there needs to be some talking. That kind of goes without saying, or with saying, I suppose. But it's also important that the person talking is relatively interesting and has a personality to present those viewing. The second rule is that there needs to be people to talk to, otherwise the host is just rambling into the void. Therefore, they'll either talk to you, the viewer, directly, or there's a live audience drafted in to cheer, jeer, or appear as part of the host's wacky shenanigans.
I used to watch Conan, but I would only watch the beginning, and then I would turn it off. Because I would like to watch that wacky noodle stuff. That was cool. Then Jay Leno got Conan taken off the air, so we don't like Jay Leno here.
With such a broad church of TV encompassed by these couple tenets, it's no surprise that a plethora of shows have garnered success off the very diverse interpretations of these couple key tenets, from the preppy positivity of Ellen to the necessary conflict and consequent chaos of a show like The View.
You just said we don't scream at each other, right? Or is it just you that gets to scream?
Okay, no, I agree.
Okay, then lower your voice because we are very close to each other.
You know what I hate? First of all, I don't like Ted Cruz. He's an absolute loser. But what I don't like is a lot of these. What I don't like is a lot of these performative moments that are set up in like talk shows or even in like conversations or debates or that are so very clearly like clippable moments. I don't know. It's something that I've heard people talk about previously, and as I've like gotten more into the whole or more adjusted into the whole content creator thing, I've just realized how gross it really is. There are people who really just like go out of their way to try to set up these clippable moments, so that people, you know, put them on whatever TikTok or YouTube or whatever it is, just to get some like some more popularity. It's just like so cringe sometimes. This is what kind of reminds me of, I don't like Ted Cruz, but you know what I mean, where they intentionally set it up to make it like the audience against the person in a way that's like very performative, that's just palatable for like a 5-second clip. It's so cringe.
I know you come here to sell a book and try to pick a fight, but we're not going to do it.
No less, it follows that such a wide-reaching genre would spawn numerous subgenres, many of whom have their own means of engagement and corresponding audiences. One of the most significant that arose during the 90s was a style called tabloid talk shows, a controversial and divisive genre that utilized the concept of guest involvement to the maximum. It soon dawned on TV producers that hosts weren't the only people who could be interesting, and that could serve a purpose as well.
See this, you dumb bitch? Can you read?
My favorite Jerry Springer episode was the one where the guy was talking to like that trans girl, and she's like, I have something to tell you. I'm actually like I'm trans. And he's like, I don't care. And I was like, hell yeah, brother. I respect the energy.
What are you talking about? What is this?
What do you mean you've been replaced, bitch?
In the years following, a lot of these shows cropped up that broadcast what would normally be extremely personal disputes and the explosive confrontations that would follow from them, added many people's desire for their 5 minutes for fame and orchestration designed to heighten tension between the parties involved, and you were often left with highly theatrical yet extremely real coverage of interpersonal troubles. For some it was entertaining, but for others it was unwatchable. Enter stage left Oprah Winfrey, the queen of TV talk shows.
Oprah Windfury. It's a popular WoW meme back in the day.
Who some argue made
Heard that in 2004.
the industry more accessible to tabloid shows due to the intimate nature of her own. Her often very personal statements and opinions through the guise of a large media personality caught a lot of people's attention. With that said, Oprah was also thought to not be entirely comfortable with that presentation and sought to retain a more conventional and professional structure that wouldn't conflate her with an often turbulent genre. One of these measures undertaken was to involve experts in certain segments and provide an extra veneer of credibility for the discourse at hand. One of these experts was an individual by the name of Phil McGraw, who held a PhD in clinical psychology. Oprah had met...
Does he really? I thought it was fake. He has a PhD in clinical psychology? Wow. From where? What?
Phil a few years prior while working with his trial consultancy firm CSI, after being sued for statements she had made on her show relating to mad cow disease. After that beef was settled, she offered McGraw a visiting spot on Oprah where he would be brought on to discuss questions surrounding relationships and general life hardships with her guests. With their focus being on the host, a lot of shows experimented with
Bro, I feel so bad for Will Smith, man. It's not even just that he's like dating Jada. It's that everybody knows like the details, the intimate details of their relationship, and it's just that's the worst part. I feel like it wouldn't be so bad if they didn't share all their like private life on TV. You know, we didn't need to know that they're in some kind of an open situation or something. You know what I mean? I feel like that's just additionally embarrassing. But
different styles. And not
like if it's private, it's like, yeah, whatever. It just is what it is. But then it's being public, everybody's weighing in on it and all that stuff. Gross.
Too soon after, we were asking the question, what if we had an expert in subject X or subject Y as a host? And how would that influence how they interact with their guests? Dr. Phil seemed to serve as the answer to this question.
The only person in the world I've ever wanted to cheer for me was him.
Look at him.
The only person in the
Stand up. Look at him. No, you're hiding from him. I want you to look at him, and let me tell you something. I
Beat him
want
up.
you to
Punch
listen.
him.
I don't want you to go off and think about what you're going to say in response. I want you to listen and look her in the eye and hear what she's saying.
These segments proved to be extremely popular, with Oprah giving them an increasingly regular presence on her program. As this popularity persisted, Winfrey, being the business person that she is, decided that Dr. Phil McGraw sections had the potential to be its own TV series. So in 2002, 4 years after our visiting expert made his debut appearance on Oprah, Dr. Phil was launched to impressive ratings that have maintained themselves during the show's long and illustrious lifespan, receiving multiple daytime Emmy nominations and praise from viewers who feel that Dr. Phil's more measured approach to his guests allows them to be viewed through a more human lens.
Okay.
However, as we've seen with other talk show hosts, what is presented is never quite the full picture.
Do you think that Dr. Phil started off like good, and then he just kind of became less good? Like, you know, like the content corruption, I like to call it. You know what I mean? Do you think that's what happened?
To go without saying that TV is very selective, even more so than other mediums, and over time Dr. Phil's show garnered more and more critics who questioned the professionalism and the ethics behind the treatment of the guests involved, ultimately culminating in a flurry of allegations made by former employees and guests towards the show's producers and
well, that's one of the problems, right? Like him being an actual clinical psychologist just puts more expectations on him too, to act more professionally. When you got some crazy motherfucker doing like doing God knows what, you're like, it's just an idiot. But now, why are you going this way, bro? Whatever. But then you put like a clinical psychologist in there, and it's all of a sudden it's like, this is a little bit suspicious. You know what I mean? All of a sudden the expectations change a little bit.
of course the man himself, leading many to question whether the show was really a force for good. Well, ladies, gentlemen, and all complimentary variations, today we'll delve into Dr. Phil, the rise and success of the show, alongside its notable social media renaissance, while also investigating the controversy and the concomitant ethical questions of our beloved TV title at the center of today's video. My friends, let us not dwell any longer. It is time to discuss the dangers of Dr. Phil.
Ooh,
and now,
dangers of Dr. Phil.
When it comes to making videos, I have many weapons in my arsenal. But there's one secret weapon that's so powerful, former President George W. Bush wants to invade my house.
Oh, no.
You see, my friends, I am harboring a weapon of mass production. So it's time for me to open up and let you see it. This is vidIQ. Yes,
I knew it!
vidIQ.
I knew he was gonna plug something. It's like I plug my ass so I don't poop when I go out to eat. You could laugh, but if you've ever shit your pants, you know it's worth it.
The secret weapon that helps you print out bangers like the Weimar Republic prints money. How? Let's just say it'll give you much needed help on video titles. Titles that will actually make people gaze upon its poetry.
Gaze, okay.
Not enough? How about some time tinkering with the algorithm so it picks up views from trending videos similar to yours? Maybe stealing some of Jay Aubrey's views for your own. I mean...
Alright, good advertisement. Good advertisement, guys.
It empties you out until there's nothing left to empty. No matter what happens,
wrong way.
it hurts. You don't stop dancing, and you don't stop smiling, and you give those people what they want.
Allow me to introduce you to a man that you may not have heard of. This chap is called Les Crane, and in the 1960s, he had a somewhat popular late-night program fittingly called The Les Crane Show. In an attempt to compete with other programs at the time, they introduced a format which involved a shotgun microphone and members of the audience, whom he would proceed to grill on a multitude of affairs, including socially sensitive topics at that time, such as homosexuality.
I have to differ with you, I have to argue with you on that one point there, because there are some homosexuals who are that way because of either environment or because of a background that has caused them to go that route.
Who cares? I mean, I already understand the context of what they're talking about without even seeing it. It's the idea that somebody said, like, oh, no, you're born gay. And someone's like, well, no, there are environmental factors. Who cares? There are environmental factors and biological factors for everything. Who cares? Being gay is there's nothing wrong with it. You know what I mean? Even if there was something that was like, who cares? Who cares, dude? Okay? Maybe one day I accidentally, like, fucking, my dog licked my wiener and made me gay. You know? Who cares? What's wrong with that? But, yeah, okay, whatever. Let's move on.
Now, that doesn't mean that all homosexuals are sick people.
But not
none
through,
of them are sick.
It's not something that happens through seduction or anything like that. The background is just that they grew up in a society and they found the existing heterosexual norms not to their liking, whether it was the way they perceived their own parental relationships.
On one episode, he had hosted a debate with Lee Harvey Oswald's mother on the topic of her son's guilt, which was concluded with an editorial recap from Mel Brooks, of all people. But unfortunately, I couldn't retrieve any footage of such.
Wow.
By all means, Les Crane was perceived as a vigorous yet reasoned interviewer, and although the tabloid label was retroactively applied to his show, not too long after followed what many believe was a more fitting prototype for the genre.
You are a disruptor. You are a man.
Are you willing to hear my views?
As soon as I finish.
Well, I don't have to hear you calling me names. If you want to hear my views,
do what you want. You want to walk away?
I think
Fine,
it's a circus and that you're a fool and that we're not in any way discussing.
You're a liar and a danger to the country.
Boom.
This is Joe Pine. He was another 50s and 60s talk show host who garnered popularity on radio and TV for his often outspoken and opinionated demeanor. However, in 1965, his own self-titled talk show went into wide syndication. These typically involved fiery discussions with highly controversial guests, colored by Pine's own racially progressive yet otherwise socially conservative political positions. These conversations would regularly escalate into shouting matches and even physical aggression, with reports being that chairs would regularly be thrown and Pine would have to eject his guests live on TV. Although receiving criticism for his platforming of vicious and even dangerous individuals, he continued to retain a steady viewership until the show's cessation a couple years later. In the years following, a number of hosts utilized similar blueprints for their talk shows, but after the heights of the Vietnam War and hippie culture that were a catalyst for a lot of these broadcasts, the genre maintained a middling profile that wasn't the source of great discourse, mostly carried by Phil Donahue and Dick Cavett, both of whom were known for their slightly more dignified techniques, though not without their exceptional moments. However, this began to change once more in the 1980s, with the emergence of shows that catered towards more controversial subjects that regularly resulted in conflicts between the guests and the hosts.
Go ahead and talk.
So shut up.
No, you
so shut up. So shut up. Sit down.
Sit down. You had your chance of fame.
Jerry Springer, baby.
Sit down.
Oh my God. Jesus Christ. The legend himself, dude.
Probably the most famous example of this is Jerry Springer, the syndicated show named after its host. Springer, a former lawyer and civic official, had initially conceived the show as a forum for political debate. But
why are people a lawyer? And he devolved into that? Oh my God, incredible. You gotta love it, baby. He was a lawyer and he started doing that? That's crazy. I guess who wouldn't for the money, right?
After a few unsuccessful seasons, Springer and his new producer overhauled this concept and decided to focus on more personal issues with members of the public as their guests, complemented by scripted sequences that would regularly escalate into physical confrontation, sort of like Oprah meets WWE. It clearly took a few notes from Joe Pine's show while replacing the political content with more sociological matters. Although the scripted sequences would eventually be scrapped, the topics were similarly contentious and were still the source of numerous controversies over the years that followed. However, the success spoke for itself, and it wasn't long before the genre was more popular than ever, featuring multiple syndicated shows with different hosts and international producers taking an interest as well. Probably the most famous overseas example in the UK is The Jeremy Kyle Show, which ran for a total of 17 seasons and was no less frenzied than its American contemporaries.
There! Listen, no, I'm her boyfriend.
Oh, don't worry about you. You didn't
I was there all the time.
Everyone's seen on his face. Didn't delete him off BB, so they all didn't get.
Oh, shut up, mate.
So there we go.
Nonetheless, in spite of these ratings, the controversy...
What language was that? What the fuck was that? The hell? Jesus Christ.
Controversies are no less troubling for certain viewers and even businesses. As entertaining as conflict can be, many hosts played a role that could be perceived as provocative, and as a person who is also trying to present themselves as an arbiter, that seemed a somewhat compromising problem. The audience also often didn't help, seeming more like citizens in a Roman Colosseum, ready to watch whatever gladiatorial combat was about to transpire. Producers also participated by purposely choosing topics that would garner the most views, but at the same time could also cause the most damage to the people actually involved. Anyone who's familiar with conflict resolution knows the last thing you need is a large mob egging you on, and therefore this sort of TV, although entertaining for some, was deeply discomforting for others. A lot of these shows have been taken off air since, some the result of host fatigue, some the result of TV scandals, and some the result of actual deaths. Many of these shows also employed methods that were questionable in
who died? What the fuck?
Their authority. A polygraph or lie detector, for example, is always a popular piece of equipment.
You know what's interesting though? Like I watched something on a polygraph test. Polygraph tests don't even tell if you're lying or not. Apparently all a polygraph test does is it just shows you like an inconsistency. So like if you could be asked like an uncomfortable question and it could still elicit a response that's like that would be lying. It's just like how if it could be like an uncomfortable topic, like you could ask somebody like, oh, do you like hamburgers? But maybe like if they were fucking, a cow farted on them one day when they were younger and now they're just like really upset. So it might seem like they don't like hamburgers, or something, but in reality they hate cows. So they love eating them just to spite the cow,
Its accuracy, however, is never guaranteed, yet its word was treated like gospel on all of these programs. In the case of the Jeremy Kyle Show, it was taken off the air after a guest who was known to have suffered from depression took his own life following his appearance and failure of a polygraph, of which Kyle persistently insulted his guest and branded him a serial liar, of which the coroner concluded could well have contributed to his untimely death. With the revelation, there were probably other people who suffered the same fate as well. I'd like to say that it was a sudden moral consciousness that kicked in the demise of many of these shows, but I think it became apparent to producers and studios that these shows were liabilities, and that if they continued to utilize techniques that provoke their guests in such a way, they could easily be facing some very serious lawsuits. So
I'm surprised that they actually like some level of accountability was taken, because I feel like people would just be like, oh, I don't care. It's not my fault. Don't you sign waivers to go on there? It's fucked up, though. Somebody took his own life because of that. That's terrible. Jesus. It really goes to show you how much control some of these people have. It's not easy to take like fucking crazy amounts of criticism from like random people online, even if it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's fucking crazy.
Over the 21st century, these shows have slowly faded into rerun rotation. But what could have taken its place? Well, this is where Dr. Phil makes his grand entrance.
Okay. What happened?
When he arrived on the scene in 2002, this sort of content was just passing its peak, but still pulling significant ratings. The market was pretty saturated, and there were more than enough talk show hosts for viewers to choose from. The only real thing he had going for him on paper was his qualifications and the backing of the behemoth that was Oprah. However,
let's be real though, like all these lawyer shows, what am I saying? All these lawyer shows, like a boomer. All these like court shows, that's just the new you know what I'm saying? That's the new whatever I'm saying. You understand what I'm saying, right? That's just the new talk show. There's all these lawyer shows, like these people who pretend they know what the fuck they're talking about and all this stuff. Except for Judge Judy. I love Judge Judy. She's base as fuck, so.
He'd need more than that for the sort of longevity that she had enjoyed. What would he do to ensure that? Well, let me introduce you to Dr. Phil.
Do that.
The year now is 2022 if my upload schedule is intact, and Dr. Phil has been up and running for 20 seasons.
Damn, how long? Wait, how long were you making this video for? Okay, cool.
It has outlasted nearly every tabloid talk show, a majority of normal talk shows, including Oprah, and still pulls significant viewership. He must have done something right.
You call people trailer trash or rednecks.
I have.
Okay, 90% of people are stupid.
True. That's actually
true. There should
true.
be a law passed against stupid people. Well, you better hope that isn't true.
From the off, Dr. Phil seemed to set himself apart from the
I mean, he's kind of right, though. Most people are kind of fucking dumb, and that's okay. We're all kind of dumb, you know? I feel like to, yeah.
Competition, particularly in his approach to how he treated guests. I think many hosts, even the ones that were probably more sensitive than most, didn't have the human background to navigate the complex issues that many of these shows often sought to tackle. Now, McGraw wasn't a full-time psychologist, as we know he was a bit of a jack of all trades, but his educational background in clinical psychology and at least some degree of practical experience made him a much better fit for the moderating position that such an individual should typically occupy.
You also said women are really emotional and men are logical. And I got the sense, and I'm just asking you, tell me what you think. I'm not trying to, I just want to know where you come down on it. You said that as though logic is at this level and emotion is at a lesser level of functioning. Is that how you think he feels?
Psychology isn't just about knowing all these behavioral...
It's so weird when, like, people say women are emotional, but, like, men are, like, men have emotions, too. There just tends to be, like, anger. It's just it's so annoying.
Terms or knowing how to approach them. Honestly, that would make pretty dry TV. A lot of the art is in being able to deconstruct people's behavior and language to reach the core of how they're feeling. The truth is, a lot of people don't say how they're feeling, particularly in these situations when their behaviors or beliefs may be challenged. It's a very interpretive job and requires picking out certain details that you may typically overlook in everyday conversation. Now, I'm sure Dr. Phil has his own style. However, when the show started, he definitely demonstrated this ability, and this often allowed him to connect with his guests more successfully than others from around his time.
And you feel guilty about this, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
You feel guilty about where she is and what she's doing?
Yes.
Do you? Because you guys say we're kind of blaming ourselves for this. Right? Have you intended to sabotage your daughter?
No.
Have you intended to make her stubborn?
No.
Non-compliant?
No.
Disobedient? Rebellious? So we need to put blame out of this. Parents don't need to be feeling blame about this. What you need to be thinking about here is that you have a responsibility for what's happened.
Dr. Phil took a familiar formula, the fact that one or more people had a problem, the problem affected their daily life, and they wished to address it. Now, when you present this scenario to a majority of tabloid talk show hosts or their producers, the question will be, how can we generate the most drama? The approach that Dr. Phil appears to take is more related to how can this problem be addressed. And for many, there's a great satisfaction within problem resolution. Other talk show hosts presented talking about your problems as being intimidating, and certainly didn't really inspire people to seek out help. And to be fair to Dr. Phil, studies have shown that viewers of his shows are more likely to do just that, and that's really nothing to turn your nose up at. When dealing with certain disputes, he didn't seem to be insensitive to the human factors at play.
That's interesting because, like, some of the things that I've seen from Dr. Phil is him doing just that. I wonder if he's leaned more into it. You know what I mean? I wonder if he's leaned more into it as time has gone on.
Factors are what made Dr. Phil appealing. One of the skills to what his show does is one that I describe as extraction. A lot of the time, Dr. Phil would be presented with a specific situation, one that on the surface could be rather niche and certainly not applicable to you or I. Everyone has their own unique situations and challenges, but a lot of the time they can also be rooted in general struggles that can affect anyone. And by being able to focus on that, he could connect with audience members who may be emotionally moved by hearing such struggles. This is something he's referenced in interviews, and although some would justifiably find it a bit objectifying towards his guests, it's also definitely the source of some success.
What I'm recommending is empirically supported in the psychological and psychiatric literature, and I don't diagnose people. And I say very clearly, I can't diagnose you here. I would have to complete a lot more interview than I have time to do. I would have to do a battery of psychometric tests. I'd probably have to do a brain workup and some lab work, and I can't do that here. Now, in the short list of my considerations, if I was doing it, might be the following, but these are things you're going to check out when you leave here. And so they look at that and say, you know what, I think this guy's checking all the boxes.
Yeah. Well, so it just seems from that explanation that what you're doing is more for everybody else than for the person sitting in that chair, maybe.
They're teaching tools.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I understand what the guy's saying. I feel like there's a fine line. I mean, what could he really do? What is he supposed? You can't diagnose somebody on like live TV. So it's more one of those things. I mean, I just fundamentally being somebody with like clinical expertise doing a TV show isn't necessarily like a bad thing or like a wrong thing to do. Isn't like a bad or a wrong thing to do. I guess it's more like what he does with it. If it's like something irresponsible, be the bigger issue more than anything else.
Everybody there is a teaching tool. If I'm talking to you, it's a trade-off. You get up close and personal focus and lots of resources, because I have a blue ribbon advisory board with top minds from the top learning centers in the country.
I do think it can help to put individuals more in touch with their own mental health, with mind to the fact that such information should be handled carefully, which we'll put a pin in for now.
Did it never occur to you that, you know what, I'm putting myself first and my need to vent and my need to explode, I'm putting that ahead of my children's best interest.
He yells at me too.
You don't get it. I hope all of you at home get it, but you don't get it.
The angle that Dr.
I mean, that obviously doesn't work from like a clinical perspective. You don't really, effectively berate people like that. When you're trying to diagnose somebody or trying to do something like that, fundamentally, this is something that's pretty well, like, decently known. It's like you're not really trying to tell somebody something. I'm really not paying any attention to this. Holy fuck. You're not really trying to tell somebody something. You're trying to get somebody to like understand what's going on, right? So that's what the bigger thing than anything else. So when you're getting diagnosed by like some kind of a clinical individual, they'll usually figure out what your problem is relatively quickly, and then they'll just try to get you to realize it, which is one of the things that can become problematic potentially if they're like bad people, because they can almost they can lead you in like an incorrect path. Wow, I'm just eating so much dick,
Phil adopts is also really important for audience retention. There are lots of cool.
Let me leave this dungeon because he invited me up. Would you direct to Kyle Kalinske? Maybe. It's 2 hours. I don't know, dude. Maybe. Sorry, Z-King, your alert didn't go through, my brother.
Causes for people's mistakes and misdeeds, some of which we'll never understand. However, Dr. Phil's focus on personal responsibility is universal. I wholeheartedly believe good people can do bad things and learn from them. At the same time, the only way to properly grow is to accept responsibility, because if you assign all rationale for your behavior to external circumstances, you're admitting you don't have control over your actions. Personal responsibility is the driving force for change, and by focusing on that, Dr. Phil ensures that his show has the ability to find the solution within the problems presented. In discussing people's specific problems, McGraw always managed to approach it from a perspective that gave it mass appeal, retaining its educational grounding, while still speaking directly to the guests. It was accessible yet challenging. I don't doubt it has probably helped to...
Like, what's his face? The kid that the shot kids. People. I don't know. What is his name? Kyle Rittenhouse.
Fair few people in not just understanding themselves, but possibly being more empathetic to those around them, and in possibly recognizing those same signs. Dr. Phil's demeanor also aids viewers in how they may feel morally about watching content that could typically leave vulnerable individuals somewhat exposed in the eye of the media. As much as gladiatorial combat enthralls those who desire it, there's always the question of the cost to those brave warriors who put themselves out there. The Dr. Phil show presented discussion on these matters as if they were the first step to getting genuine help, and therefore viewers could feel more at ease believing that they weren't necessarily contributing to a harmful practice. A lot of guests seem to be in a better place after a discussion with Dr. Phil, and whereas other tabloid talk show hosts almost focused on escalation, the art of Dr. Phil seemed to be de-escalation. Each reaches some sort of conclusion. The latter seems more mutually favorable in the long term. I think in this case, Dr. Phil carved out an industry niche like very few others, the show that took a genre nearly done to death and subverted it, and started its own trend, this being what some branded as self-help TV, a more conscious way to approach issues that had previously been treated with apathy and even provocation on mainstream television. It's clear that Dr. Phil saw himself less as a therapist and more as a moderator, and wished to present himself as the reasonable voice within often two very strongly contrasting ones. And for many viewers, they perceived him as just that, and tuned in to hear that voice discuss affairs that may hit close to home. And as one of the pioneers of this new movement, it was only upwards from there. But was there something more at stake? One of the common appraisals of Dr. Phil is that he was clearly an intelligent guy, and there was little doubt about that. The dude knew how to present a TV show, and as the ratings followed suit, he enjoyed success that even rivaled his superiors, and over the coming decades, he was only grow his influence as a cultural icon. At first, many viewers did...
So far, I feel like this is the most positive I've ever seen Dr. Phil look. In general. Like, I feel like a lot of people are usually talking like relentless amounts of shit on the guy.
Consider him of the more academic cloth, particularly with his background and experience. However, professional psychologists seldom have illustrious TV careers, because the topic is often at odds with a lot of the principles of entertainment. I think McGraw identified this pretty quickly, and in interviews, he didn't tie himself too closely to the occupation, more emphasizing his nature to inform people to go and receive proper help. A lot of individuals might speculate on how Dr. Phil evolved over the years. A lot of TV shows tend to change, and when discussing talk shows,
I mean, that sounds good. I mean, there's like a short little TV show. Obviously, ratings are a factor. It brings people on. It tries to get them to realize something about themselves and seek more help. And overall, sounds like a good impact. What is it now? Like, I feel like it's devolved. No?
They often have altered their structure to stay relevant and even somewhat acceptable within the ever-adjusting moral compass of the viewers. Dr. Phil was different in this sense. He maintained a lot of consistency with his style. However, what I think changed was how it was presented and perceived by others around it. Indeed, as that style garnered popularity in the mainstream industry, he found a new status as a bit of an oracle on affairs affecting the world in general, and one that placed him in a rather unique position, but posed a few challenges of their own. However, the Doctor here responded accordingly.
I do believe that there comes a moment in time where all things wrong can be made right. But if we're going to do this, we're going to do this my way.
In 2006,
oh shit, dude.
McGraw chose not to renew his license to practice psychology professionally in Texas. Some may ask whether this affected his ability to run his show. However, in California, where said show was based, their respective board of psychology reported to have agreed that Dr. Phil does not actually practice psychology on his show.
Yeah, I feel like it has no impact. He probably didn't renew it because there was like no real reason to, because he's not doing it clinically and he probably makes a ton of money. I feel like maybe, I mean, like, what does the license renewal process even require? If it's something huge, he should have kept it going. You know what I mean? Like, if you had to redo it, if you had to take like a test, he should have just kept renewing it, because that can be really difficult. I think you do. My wife has her license in like a social work or whatever. I think you have to periodically or somewhat regularly, every so often, take tests, right? You have to take tests for this kind of shit. To keep your shit going. But I guess he makes so much money, he figures, fuck it, he might as well not even care anymore. So, whatever.
And therefore does not require a license. Some have questioned why he did this, and my personal opinion holds that if he didn't actually need it for his show, then it likely became a liability in his eyes. Being a practicing psychologist obviously comes with certain responsibility.
Oh, maybe. I didn't even think of it like that. I thought of it more of like for me with my CDL. I didn't renew my CDL because like I don't care. I don't drive anymore for that. Although I could, you do it every 2 years and maintain it 20 CE hours in my state. Oh, is it just 20? Or I feel like it'd probably be more. So certification hours. That maybe that's why. Maybe he didn't feel like doing like additional work. He's probably a millionaire anyway. And it's like all supervision, yeah. So I guess, but the liability thing makes a lot of sense, because maybe he, like, without him being like an actual professional, maybe it makes him feel like he has less legal responsibility. Kind of could make sense. I guess it also kind of hurts his credibility not to have it, though. I don't know. Pee-pee boo-boo.
And if he or his show was found to have breached them, even if he wasn't presenting himself in a psychological capacity, then he could have landed himself in some serious shit, which would have generated a lot more controversy than him just opting not to renew his license.
What is a CE hour? Certified hours? Britney Spears' parents.
A lot of people found this out during Britney Spears' life crisis in 2008. During a stint where she had been hospitalized, her parents, clearly eager to support her, invited Dr. Phil to her bedside, an invitation which he readily accepted. However, after his visit, Dr. Phil decided to issue a public statement, expressing an urgency for the troubled pop star to receive medical support. This was met with disappointment from Spears' parents, who expressed that McGraw had violated their trust by issuing a public statement, and it was even alleged that a complaint had been filed to the Board of Psychology that McGraw had practiced psychology without a license. Now,
that is actually really shitty. I mean, they wanted him to go there for, I mean, probably because, one, he has like an actual, you know, clinical experience, you know, so he could be a little bit more intelligent and engaging with this. Because Britney Spears, regardless of what you think about the conservatorship, she got fucked like hard. Her life was like from way too early. She was in the limelight. She was overly sexualized. She was bullied when she, like, her and Justin Timberlake broke up. It's crazy. The paparazzi followed her relentlessly in ways that they don't do now, because we have like the age of the internet. And so I get why they want him on there, because not only does he have that experience, but he's also somebody who like has a general understanding of the TV. So he has like a unique experience for her. But to take it after going on and like to make a public statement about it at all is just like a violation of trust. It doesn't matter whether it's legally okay or not. It's just like morally shitty. You know, they asked you in confidence and like you could have said no, but you went, you know?
Now, there are a few more layers to this than a lot of press reported at the time. Dr. Phil did actually know Britney's parents in a personal capacity and claimed to have attended the hospital as a friend and not a therapist. Nonetheless, it still engendered a lot of discourse about his responsibility as a public figure and his outspoken reputation on mental health, with many asking the question of whether he had actually breached his responsibility as a confidant. Dr. Phil did actually issue a response to this on his website, where he clarified he did not practice psychology and had no intent to practice it in the foreseeable future. It definitely showcased the dichotomy with how many audience members viewed him and how he viewed himself, and in spite of these statements, many still held him as an expert in his respective field. And to be fair, it's not like he disagreed. In his statement, he still drew attention to the fact that he had decades of experience and a PhD to show for it. He was still a doctor, after all. Although Dr. Phil didn't seem to change in his approach towards guests, not too long after dropping his license, McGraw seemed to expand his franchise. Many continued to utilize the notion of expert advice, including the show The Doctors, which, although not featuring McGraw, was created and produced by him. The Doctors is another talk show that leans more into the general medical issues and was relatively successful, being cancelled in 2022 after 14 seasons. Another recent show, House Calls with Dr. Phil, once more uses a trope more associated with traditional doctors who may be called to a patient's abode. Though looking at the state of healthcare nowadays, I'm surprised we didn't get phone calls with Dr. Phil. He also launched the company Doctor on Demand, which allowed individuals to schedule appointments with medical and psychological professionals. I'll say that it's a good thing he was providing a platform for more licensed experts, but I also think it's indicative of the fact that he still enjoyed his status and wanted to make the most of it. The truth was, whether he felt like a practicing psychologist or not, it was clear how other people viewed him. The other reason why there aren't a lot of TV figures in the realm of Dr. Phil's is because of the sensitivity of humans themselves and the trouble that can cause. Dr. Phil was no stranger to that either. In fact, even his most successful, he could be facing multiple lawsuits, mostly from disgruntled guests who were unhappy with their portrayal of the show. A large majority of these lawsuits were fairly quickly dismissed, with judges finding the coverage provided by Dr. Phil was fair and McGraw's language being protected under the First Amendment. Dr. Phil occupied this near bulletproof position, where his words were viewed as holding a significant amount of weight, yet could never officially bear that much responsibility as he operated and presented the show as a talk show host.
Who is she? Is she that girl from The Baby Show? She looks like that girl from that Baby Show, right? Like the young kids, 18 but babies. What is that show called? Is it a HIPAA violation? I don't think so. I forgot her name. I don't know. 16 and Pregnant? Is that the show I'm talking about? I don't know.
He may not have changed his method, but he had definitely shifted his image towards a more business-oriented model that provided him with more protection. He would regularly make TV appearances and stage interventions with other celebrities, ordinary people, or washed-up TV stars, obtaining this messiah-like status amongst many as a guy who would fly in and rescue you from your lowest points, or give you a good pep talk at least. As the halfway point between medical professional and entertainer, Dr. Phil had occupied a position in the media that enabled him to develop his brand with extensive influence, while maintaining an audience who respected his approach to sensitive matters. It was a devastating combination, and it seemed like there was very little that could undo it. However, with the necessity to occupy two...
Yeah, it sounds like he's going to undo it himself. I mean, that's what happens when you this thing that happens called terminally online, TOB, terminally online behavior. That's what the diagnosis that I've created, where you become terminally online. And like you no longer have a grounding in the real world, and you just start to like act in like this really weird, fucking bizarre way that's impossible to communicate. What is my opinion on everything bagels? Poggers.
Two quite conflicting positions pose a challenge as the media landscape evolves. Well, let's find out.
What is it? What is this? What is this, FNAF? Holy moly, it's crazy. Nut
hey,
bars.
Dr. Phil here. I'm backstage getting ready to do the show, which is where you're used to seeing me. But in the virtual world of computer games, I can be somebody completely different.
Oh, shit. True.
I can be Super Mortal Phil, defender of my countrymen, and a super stud who gets to have cool hair while playing. Oh. And in this virtual world...
Wow, this is such a relatable moment from Dr. Philliard here. Holy moly, guys. I feel like we're one and the same person at this point. Holy goodness, this is crazy. Oh, how old is this commercial? He's so fucking cringe. Jesus Christ.
I'm agile, powerful, and I never have to do what my wife said.
As mentioned at the start,
I'm so sorry. That's so funny. It's not even that funny, but it's so funny. I never have to do what my wife says. Oh, I love it. Oh, I love him. There's nothing that could happen in this video that would make me dislike Dr. Phil at this point. This guy's hilarious.
This sort of relatable. Mostly found its footing within the airwaves of mainstream television, and throughout most of its early lifespan, there was nothing that could really change that. However, over time, with the increasing influence of social media, opportunities presented themselves for TV networks to advertise and possibly garner new viewers. It also served as an archive for viewers who may have missed the show, or wanted to rewatch popular clips without too much inconvenience. With this in mind, it's not hard to see why the Dr. Phil Show was one of the earlier TV shows to set up a channel on the budding website known as YouTube. A platform like YouTube provided the perfect opportunity for success. At its inception, it only really allowed for shorter clips, which I know is hard to actually remember, but for a TV show like Dr. Phil, this meant that snippets of the show could be put online to hopefully reel new audience members in. However, at that time, YouTube was much more oriented towards homegrown content, and although the Dr. Phil producers tried their best by publishing multiple interviews with famous names, using clips often addressing trending topics, and even having McGraw respond to comments in his own YouTube series, nothing ever quite went viral like they may have hoped. This did not deter them, though, and over the years, they continued to...
Well, you know, one of the problems that Dr. Phil, like, unironically has is I've actually, you know, I've seen Dr. Phil like partial segments on his channel, and I'm like, oh, if I see that segment, like I'll try to like I've reacted to it one time, and like they DMC the fuck out of it instantly. If you really want like your shit to go viral, Dr. Phil, stop DMCing everything. If you put it on YouTube, I feel like it's fucking free game, and it's not going to be bad. That's how like a lot of these viral moments happen. People start to like reacting to it, talking about it, blah 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 blah. And when you're so like hyper like critical and shit of it, or you don't allow that type of behavior, it it fucks you in the butt a little bit. It tickles your pickle if so to speak.
Upload content that cultivated an audience. And as YouTube became more palatable to mainstream sources who were able to upload high-definition content, and with users becoming more intrigued by subjects of Dr. Phil's episodes, the view count seemed to begin to pick up significantly. This was definitely aided by the rise of the early commentary genre that specialized in talking about other people, particularly those who may have been slightly more eccentric than the average Joe.
Certainly paid off.
It's just so fascinating when something catches like that girl. What is her name? The Catch Me Outside girl.
Danielle Bregoli or something.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, because I didn't know her as the Catch Me Outside girl. How
about that?
Another emerging trend was the nature for the internet to bestow meme status onto people. Now, this had its roots in something quite usual. Our culture has always enjoyed making overnight sensations of relatively unknown figures. However, the internet certainly made this easier, targeting people who stood out from the crowd, whether that be due to their behavior or just their appearance. Now, in many ways, this could be quite fortuitous for someone like Dr. Phil, whose content was built on dealing with often challenging personas. But often to acquire such a status, a person needs to be a perfect storm of characteristics that hasn't been seen elsewhere, and those sorts of people are a rare breed. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce you to someone by the name of Danielle Bregoli.
I'm pretty violent.
Oh.
I'm wish her in the face because she wouldn't get out my face.
The Danielle Bregoli saga, baby.
Door, she's breaking down my door. I don't stop till I start seeing dents in the door.
Dang.
Danielle Bregoli was like...
Sounds like she's a typical white man named Kyle. You know what I'm saying? Just a typical break everything, typical video gamer.
Any Dr. Phil guests. A troubled youth
who
possess
Uncle
serious
Phil's much better
behavioral
than
issues
Dr.
and externalize them in a way that many youngsters have a tendency to do. Dr. Phil often showcased troubled teens on his show, and on paper, the premise of her appearance was not exceptional. However, paper can only account for so many variables, and when she took the stage in early 2016, it was clear that this was not going to be any ordinary episode.
I ain't gonna lie, there's no reason to lie. Everybody know already, like.
What do you say to yourself that gives you the right to take somebody else's car?
Yeah.
You're not gonna be sliding. You mean? That's what makes me want to take the next bitch car.
What?
If she blew, this is the what's that girl's name? The period. That's this girl basically of TikTok. Yeah, baloney, crazy stuff. I wonder if that period girl would have been like popular on. I wonder if she would have been popular. If she like was young, if she grew up like back in the day during the Danielle Bregoli era,
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Are you speaking English?
A lot of the youths that Dr. Phil addressed on the show definitely conformed to a certain mold. It was clear they were projecting aspects of culture they idolized onto themselves, and therefore their behavior, although sometimes extremely challenging, was not unfamiliar. Danielle Bregoli seemed to bring her own personal flavor to the role, and her extremely abrasive attitude also played into that. Dr. Phil in this case played the usual role of mediator, attempting to reason with her, but sometimes people...
Was Whoa Vicky on Dr. Phil? What's happening right now? How come these guys aren't walking through this? Are they okay? Okay, anyway.
Just Barbie. There to be
Brit Barbie.
And her relationship with the audience only inflamed that. Soon, Danielle was turning on everyone within the vicinity, making threats that
And Papa, your laughs are very rambunctious and whimsical. Thank you.
Didn't seem quite as threatening as they could be.
Did you say the hoes are laughing?
Yep.
So the audience are a bunch of hoes?
Yep.
True. Very based.
Catch me outside. How about that?
Huh?
How about that?
How about that?
Catch you outside?
Catch me outside. How about that?
What I just said.
At first, it didn't pick up too many views, but over time it garnered traction, and eventually the famous quote at the end of the video became noteworthy to many online observers. It wasn't long until her antics were provided international coverage and memes.
And then, but listen, it's a success story because Danielle Bregoli, once she hit 18, did OnlyFans, like every respectable girl should be doing, which is, prioritizing overly sexualizing themselves the second they turn 18. That is it. That's it. That's what every young girl's dream. Guys, it's every aspiration. Oh, let me do OnlyFans.
Started cropping up all over social media that made a mockery out of her language and demeanor, amassing online notoriety. Although the show was instrumental in the facilitation of this popularity, Dr. Phil wasn't really at the center of this discourse. Only one person really mattered, and that was Bregoli. However, she definitely started something online, and not too long after, a new genre for aspiring commentators presented itself.
Catch catch me outside. How about that?
Bro, I give up on these kids nowadays, dude. I'm so done with these fucking kids.
This is Trigger Tro. He was one of the first creators to pick up on the fascination with many Dr. Phil guests, particularly those that appeal to certain outlandish stereotypes. As Danielle Bregoli began to garner online attention, the then budding creator released a video titled The Cash Me Outside How About That Girl Roast, and the rest was history.
Yeah, I know where the car at.
Oh, the roast.
You know where the car at? Did you go to 5th grade?
Man, dude.
Did you go to 5th grade? 5th grade?
God damn, Dr. Phil straight roasted her ass.
It's funny though, but like if based on the way that the Right Opinion has demonstrated, or I guess promoted, what's the word I'm looking for? Displayed? I don't know. Based on what he showed us, it seems like Dr. Phil was like pretty intelligent up until this point. I mean, just mocking and ridiculing a girl, like yeah, it's funny to do it. But if you're looking at it from a more behavioral perspective, we're talking about a girl who very clearly wasn't really doesn't seem to have two strong parents, seems to have like an absent father and a not particularly effective mother. And it's led her down, lack of education as well, led her down like a poor path. And like he's just basically like mocking and berating her in some capacity. I'm not even gonna move. Fuck it.
You go to 5th grade?
Dr. Phil, more like Doctor, you gotta fucking chill.
The then less than 2,000 subscriber creator had struck gold, and he only continued in that direction for the following year.
That is childish and immature behavior, and
Now I get to leave.
yes, you do.
No.
Don't let the door hit you in the ass.
Oh, we got him.
What a
dude.
savage. I didn't realize Dr. Phil was such a gangster.
Dozens of Dr. Phil videos became the focus of online content, reaching more audiences than ever, and the producers, as they always have been, were sure to cash in on this new opportunity, publishing more content on the platform than they ever had before.
Today on an all-new Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phil. You are disgusting. I'm going to kill you. Give me $200.
Damn! Dr. Phil's a stone cold savage! I didn't know Dr. Phil would come after you like that. I mean, he did try and break into my house one time.
Okay.
I want the money. I'll raise enough hell till you give in and give it to me. What do you think now?
Wow.
Yes, Dr. Phil, get it!
It seems this genre...
I'm happy that I didn't grow up during that era. Because of YouTube comment, that's a little cringe to me. But hey, that's just a theory.
Content had given Dr. Phil a fresh wind of relevance amongst a new generation of viewers who wanted to engage in that content. One of the greatest drawbacks to mainstream television is that many believe it doesn't appeal to younger people, and at the end of the day, they're the future older people. Yet less than half a year after Danielle Bregoli's first appearance, Dr. Phil enjoyed over 150 consecutive weeks at the top of the syndicated TV ratings.
Damn.
Out Maury, Wendy Williams, and
150
Ellen.
weeks?
With in mind, it's clear that Dr.
That's more than a year. Really? For 3 years, this guy was like the top? Holy fuck. This guy was a fucking gangster, dude. What the hell? Very successful. Very successful. Very successful. Now I can see why he didn't renew his license. Holy fuck.
Dr. Phil had captured the attention of a new cohort of viewers, and it wasn't long until he signed another contract extending the series until 2023. Everything was going right.
Oh, yeah. Then what went wrong? He started to bowl.
Who uses the TV as a babysitter next to mom who can't.
Hey, base, dude. Listen, you can't be using the TV as a babysitter, okay? For real though, that's actually bad. And honestly, I'm more concerned with like the new age, which is your technology, because you can't really keep your kids off social media. They need to have a decent level of understanding of how this stuff works. I think just from like understanding it, so that they could potentially, they're gonna have to do a career in it. Most likely, it's the best way to go is some kind of computer science career. But at the same time, like there's people with such bad relationships with social media, like so toxic and harmful, like addicted to the likes and views and this and that and like all this other stuff, and it's just not good for young people. Anybody really, but especially young people. So I don't know how the fuck I'm gonna keep my kids away from it in a meaningful capacity. That's what I'm mostly nervous about, more than anything else. Is how am I gonna fucking do that?
With the help of social media, Dr. Phil...
Dude, I still remember when I was in Florida, I went to like Golden Corral, and like this family came in, 2 kids, like mom, dad, 2 kids, and immediately turned on the fucking like tablet so that the kid could eat, and it's like, holy fuck, man, really? Like that's so weird. Like you're not even teaching your kid doesn't even have you teach your kids to have some attention span, It's fucking nuts. I mean, they're out in public. They I get it, it's easy in the short run, but holy fuck. It's fucking nuts. So naturally, I walked up and I walked up to them, and I took the tablet away from them, and I smashed it on the ground, and everybody started clapping. They're like, "Wow, you're gonna make an incredible father." And I said, that's why they call me Papa Gut. It's a true story. You can ask around, but don't.
Pulled off one of the more impressive feats in television. He managed to make his content relevant to a new set of people, and it seemed they weren't going anywhere. He subsequently leaned into this reputation, appearing on a variety of internet shows and even co-hosting PewDiePie's popular meme review series.
How the fuck this happened?
Take it away, Doctor.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Phil here, and I am hosting Meme Review.
It seems his stoic, tough love style had become beloved by a fresh demographic, all of whom had a platform to access this content freely. However, social media can go two ways, and as much as they may love you one day, they may hate you the next. Internet culture moves quickly, even more quickly these days, in fact, and about as soon as Dr. Phil was popularized by the content he and others post online, more critical eyes were drawn towards him, finding a lot beneath the surface. It will be no surprise, given everything said thus far, that Dr. Phil wasn't without his enemies or his critics. In fact, he has been subject to severe criticism from medical professionals since the inception of his show. That can't be a surprise, really, given that his technique isn't actually one that's favored by most working in that profession.
Every parent should know the warning signs. For the most violent of criminals, there are 14 traits of serial killers. Now meet parents terrified of their own young son who...
But that is true. And if you think about it, one of those traits is killing small animals. And if you've ever watched the first Star Wars ever made... Episode 4, A New Hope. Luke fucking shoots small animals, I think swamp rats or whatever the fuck they call them. Luke is a serial killer. And it makes sense because his father, also a serial killer, who killed all the sand people, even the younglings, the youngin' ones, whatever they fucking called them. I hate sand. That's all I have to say.
Has 9 of the 14 traits.
Criticism of Dr. Phil has been present since the show's launch.
That is really irresponsible to effectively partially diagnose a random kid on the fucking internet. There's a okay. Hey guys, we're gonna. Hey, they have not. That feels like a soft diagnosis. That feels incredibly irresponsible. I could see why he garnered some criticism for that one.
In 2002, he was condemned by the National
Women
Office of Mental
and
Illness
the children
after
too.
delivered a scathing public psychological analysis of a 9-year-old in 2004, with academic commentary on his techniques not exactly changing since. However, these narratives never had much impact because a majority of academics are on the fringe of popular culture at least, with many operating strictly within their fields. 10 different psychological boards could condemn you, and it wouldn't mean anything if they didn't receive any coverage. So while Dr. Phil primarily occupied the realms of television, he was mostly immune to such commentary and controversy, in spite of the numerous lawsuits and claims all the way up to 2017. You search Dr. Phil on the TV, and the only result you'll find is the big man himself. However, this isn't quite the case with online search engines, in particular YouTube, where Dr. Phil isn't the only person talking about Dr. Phil. Yes, you see, whereas previously the closest that most academics could get to having a public platform would be an opinion piece in the New York Times or an interview on MSNBC, there was now a whole website dedicated to allowing them to upload their thoughts on their specialist subjects. Now, like with any learned commentator, the trick is to make sure the topics you're talking about are somewhat relevant to the audience. And given that Dr. Phil was indeed very relevant, many began to open up discourse on his methods and their success or lack thereof. These took form of articles, YouTube videos, anything that gave an individual a way to express their feelings.
So if Phil McGraw says it's not therapy, and he's not practicing in any way, what is it? Kind of back to my original point. It's really just entertainment.
All the seriousness with an insane amount of sound effects and transitions and just editorial nonsense.
My whole life changed the day I met Jazz because...
Well, I feel like none of that matters. Yeah, that is all it is. It's just fucking entertainment. My issue is more where he uses like his clinical, expertise to do like a soft diagnosis of some kid that he's never even met before. Whereas like earlier in the episode, we established that he's like, yeah, I can't really diagnose you, blah, 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 blah. Seemed responsible. But that was just like him fucking soft diagnosing some fucking kid with behavioral problems as a goddamn serial killer. That's the fucking problem. That's the thing I'm like, holy fuck.
She's the most spectacular woman I've ever met.
It's no wonder people forget these are real human beings. The editing turns it all into a cartoon.
Most of this began to circulate around the start of 2019. Funnily enough, this wasn't during any specific drama, more likely a product of Dr. Phil inertia and the fact that people were growing more critical of prominent media figures in general. McGraw had always accepted that he was a bit of an outcast from the industry, but I do think these criticisms were somewhat contradictory to a lot of public opinion that had definitely heralded him as this universal problem solver, particularly that which questioned the general morals of the show. What did Dr. Phil have to offer other than an interesting premise for its time?
Okay, it's good to meet you.
Hi, it's nice to meet you too.
Now, tell me what you mean when you say you're the reincarnation.
Because Pocahontas was my 13th grade grandmother, but hers...
Wow. Wasn't really expecting that. I'm sorry. I thought that we were talking about like Jesus Christ or something. Pocahontas? Why? Why would you want to be? Okay. I mean, hey. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe we can be reincarnated. You know what I mean? It's possible.
So I'm sharing her soul in my body.
Wow.
So you can feel her presence in you.
Yeah.
Well, it's difficult. Did she get you anything good or what? Sorry, that made me giggle because, you know, like Christmas presents. Oh, man. This guy's mom's pulling everything. She's pulling everything.
Being any sort of public figure and dealing with issues that are often deeply personal. You're handling sensitive information, and one of the drawbacks of Dr. Phil's show is that no matter how good he could have hypothetically been, the program was still designed to bring about drama, even if he wasn't. And people began to pick up on that. Television and therapy have always seemed somewhat opposed to each other. Although it's important that
Well, I mean, that would be the desired outcome, right? So, yeah, for sure. Let's say Dr. Phil's the kind of person who doesn't really want to, you know, sensationalize himself. His TV show gets sensationalized. He's complicit in that sensationalization because he's on the TV show. And I'm sure that he has, like, he absolutely does have some kind of an impact. And so it's one of those things where they almost create this, like, sphere where they sensationalize the content that's going on around them. And then he exists in that sphere. But then he gets to seem like the incredibly, like, he seems like the incredibly awesome and smart guy in that sphere. When the reality is he's not saying anything particular. He may not be saying anything particularly intelligent. They just have like fucking crazy people up against him, so he seems intelligent by, you know, comparison kind of a thing.
People prepared to be open about their struggles to help others is still a subject that needs to be handled with sensitivity and care. And given the fact that some of these people were not even on the show by their own volition, particularly children who are likely brought on by their parents, it's hard to see the benefit that was derived. Simply put, you wouldn't...
Well, it's the parents' fault, though, that part. You know what I'm saying, dude?
See this sort of drama in a private therapy room because TV cameras and the presence of a large public audience always encourages people to act more defensive and even aggressive.
Now I have a career and I'm famous. Like, that's what happens when you get famous. You cut people off.
That is kind of what happens sometimes, I guess.
Seriously? Everyone's upset with it. Maybe because you guys aren't relevant either, so you don't understand.
What the fuck? Some people began to... I have no idea the context of what's happening, but like, yeah, that kind of happens sometimes when you get famous. It just depends on what the motivation for it is. If you're doing it, if you're cutting somebody off because you felt like they were never really a good friend or something, and now, you know, you don't, I don't know, like I could see that. Or if they like ask you for money or something, that's one thing. If it's just because you're being or maybe you just kind of moved on. And like now you're a different person because you're in a different sphere. There's nothing wrong with actually like cutting somebody off unless it's just because you're a fucking asshole. You know what I mean? Like if you kind of like, yeah, I'm like, you know, I'm in a different sphere now. I don't really have the same interests as I used to have. Kind of, that's fine. There's nothing really wrong with that inherently. You know, if you abandon like the people who are closest to you, who had like a significant impact on your like positive growth to you becoming famous, then you're just a scummy fucking loser piece of shit.
Ask why is this TV at all? And I think it's a potent question. Probably the easiest answer is simple, that being of entertainment. And obviously that's important as it drives the core appeal of a lot of modern TV. However, it can't be the only reason when there are other ethical queries surrounding the subject. The Hunger Games is pretty entertaining for a lot of people, but there's also a reason why it's fictional. Dr. Phil can showcase people at their weakest and most vulnerable, and although it's often used to drive home a positive message, what sacrifice to a person's privacy and individual healing process is made to achieve that? Sure, Dr. Phil raises awareness, but at what cost? A lot of people clearly had it in their head there was some mutual benefit. Coming on Dr. Phil was meant to be helpful, but the only people it was guaranteed to
come on, Dr. Phil.
benefit were some viewers and the show itself. I think the audience's self-assurance that Dr. Phil offered some unique brand of assistance was really meant to mask the fact that people love to watch a car crash. There's a reason why the most successful Dr. Phil videos are the ones with the most heated confrontations. These videos, all likely staying on YouTube for the rest of eternity, showing the behavior of some extremely troubled people. Sure, Dr. Phil was better than his trash TV contemporaries, but that didn't exactly make him a force for good. And with his greater presence online, it also made it easier to reach with such criticisms. And many did just that.
So with all these different points in mind, both the positive and the negative, my question would be, why would anyone believe that Phil McGraw knows something special?
Many began to wonder what Dr. Phil was...
Because bro, he's got that fucking beautiful bald head, dude. What do you mean? What kind of a question is that, brother? What the fuck?
Offering his guests that couldn't be offered elsewhere. Well, I suppose the one thing was that any sort of treatment was not cheap in a place like the United States, and Dr. Phil did offer a space for that, at the price of a bit of TV time. Additionally, the therapy doesn't end on the Dr. Phil show. Many would attest that he provides help beyond their TV appearance, and for the children who McGraw felt were facing the most significant challenges, they would have an all-expenses paid trip to Turnabout Ranch that was designed to help put kids on the right path. Dr. Phil did offer something different to everyone.
It's interesting because like the Turnabout Ranch is probably going to be, I would imagine, a reasonably significant part of this. But how much can you blame him for that? I mean, like only because like he probably doesn't know what's going on there. It's like a recipe for disaster. We'll see like how much he was aware of like the potentially the shitty situations. But you have like a bunch of, the problem is that you take these kids and you put them into behavioral camp for like however long, which is not going to work because it doesn't teach them long-term like mechanisms to cope or deal with like whatever behavioral issues that they're having. So there was no, but we didn't know that. We are fucking so bad when it comes to mental health But so you put a bunch of behavioral kids who probably have one of the behaviors is probably like excessive lying. And then they're like, oh my God, it's so abusive here. And then they're like, well, I don't care what you have to say because you're a liar, right? And it's we get set up for this like really shitty situation. You know what I mean? And it's like how much that potentially is Dr. Phil's fault, you know? I don't know. We'll find out as we watch more, of course, but it's just something to think about. It's something to stink about. Jesus, I fucking hate having to run through this. Get my fucking shit pushed.
Everyone else. And just because a person doesn't derive benefit doesn't mean the formula in place can't help a majority of people. Does it? Okay, let's say the concept behind Dr. Phil is inherently flawed. There was no way that a show like this could possibly work in favor of every guest because of how the public spotlight affects you. It would be fair to question its status on the principle alone, but is it fair to tar the entire show with the critical brush? The least that some would argue is that McGraw and the producers involved did their best to mitigate the negative impact that may be drawn towards individuals who were involved with the show.
I'm not here to judge you.
I
am here to help you. I'm here to help you. I'm here to do what your husband should have done all along the way, and that is to lead you out of this quagmire and into the light.
Dr. Phil himself was often outspoken in making sure people knew the help an individual would be receiving, and like a lot of shows, conducted segments that revisited former participants to assess how their lives had changed since then.
So how are you doing?
Doing good. I am 4 months, clean and sober.
Good for you.
Everything.
Hey, good for you.
So glad to hear that.
It just took courage and strength, and finally love myself, because you helped me figure that out. Like, being able to do that has changed my life.
It seemed that the consensus from a lot of guests was broadly positive, and that their appearance on Dr. Phil had prompted many of them to begin turning their lives around. It likely made viewers feel good about themselves, but as people began to dig, they realized that this outlook wasn't quite as universal as it was portrayed on TV, with some even suggesting that there had been serious failures regarding the safeguarding of guests. As noted, there have been several lawsuits and allegations that were published during the lifespan of the show, but as always, the problem with these is that when there are—
Dr. Phil accused of slavery, abuse, and false imprisonment of underage sex seeker in— what? Explosive new suit. What does that mean? It's a lot of words. Dr. Phil slapped with bizarre brainwashing lawsuit. Okay, what's this last one? I can't even read that. CBS settles Dr. Phil lawsuit claiming women were held captive with naked man. What the fuck? Oh my God, these are insane.
Isolated, they're typically not high profile enough to attract attention from the public. However, when they can all be lined up in one place, a much clearer pattern can be established, and greater narratives can be expounded on the matter.
Maybe it's possible. Just like, let's pretend we don't know anything about what's going on, right? Because I kind of don't. Accusations don't necessarily mean that they're like, you know, when you have people who are going on to Dr. Phil looking for attention, I wouldn't doubt that they would try to falsely sue. It doesn't mean that they all are. I'm just saying it's not like they're coming from the most reasonable level-headed like areas. If you're going to fucking Dr. Phil, like you probably, this guy looks awesome, bro. It's like Scar from The Lion King. You're probably fucked. You're probably a little fucked in the head. You know what I mean? And, you know what I mean? I wouldn't put all my personal fucking issues on television on Dr. Phil, you know, personally.
With Dr. Phil under the spotlight as a whole and the online world making it easier to access such information, it wasn't long until people began picking apart the show's wholesome veneer. The first aspect to go under the microscope was how the show managed the handling of its guests on air. Dr. Phil and the producers always made a point about the show being a safe space for an individual to speak openly about their trials and their trauma. However, some have begun to question whether that was truly the case in the last few years, or if chasing a story was more important to the people in question.
I must know why you and my stepsisters treat me with such contempt. You know, I try to be kind and forgiving, but the nicer I am, the worse you treat me.
This is Shelley Duvall. A few decades ago, she was an A-list celebrity who had a successful and lucrative career in film and television.
Me too.
However, in 2002, she retired from acting and decided to live a life away from the limelight, making very few public appearances. Yet in 2016, that changed when she agreed to be interviewed by McGraw for an episode of Dr. Phil. What followed next was—
I feel like she's probably fucked in the head. She was in The Shining. Apparently, was that Stanley Kubrick? I could be wrong about that. That shit was fucking nuts. Like, he psychologically tortured the people on the set to get their like responses. Bro, watching, like, I've been watching some old stuff. These older directors are brutally fucking, like, psychologically tormenting of the people that they work with. And unfortunately, it makes great TV. I watched, like, a thing on The Exorcist and how much mental trauma that these people had to go through just to make that movie. But it became, like, an incredibly, like, widely revered classic. Like, these people legitimately suffered for their art. It was horrible. You'd have to watch the video on that because it's insane. It's insane how much people went through. I mean, it made for good TV, but holy fuck, you know?
Something else.
very confusing, very disturbing to me because they started out with ground zero and 000. It's like when a nun at some place tells you, you're almost 000.
What does that mean?
And she meant it. And
what does 000 mean?
Anyway, and everybody was already listening in on me, even from Santa Monica.
It should go without saying that what Duvall was experiencing was a serious episode of a mental breakdown, and she was in a clearly compromised state to which it would be questionable whether she could even understand what was happening in that moment. Throughout the interview,
probably. I mean, like, and you'd imagine Dr. Phil would be able to identify that better than anybody else.
Continuously encourages and attempts to aid Duvall in finding help, for which Duvall seems incredibly reluctant.
I want to check everything out. I want to make sure that you're healthy and that you're feeling right, thinking right, sleeping right, eating right. Do you take any medication?
No. Will you quit trying to pin me with, she's a heavy drinker, she takes pills? It's in your head. Come on, I see the V at the top there.
Yeah, I got a bald head.
That's a goose.
See, the reason I want to get you checked out is because
they're not tourniquets.
If your hair is thinning and you're feeling pain, I want to help you. I want to get you.
I mean, it seems like his heart's in the right place. A little aggressive, but that just might be the Southerner in him, the old Southerner.
To some doctors that can really check you out.
It's a physical problem.
Right.
Physical.
I want to check you out.
And I don't want any more bee bites because they threaten me, but I'm not afraid of them.
Bee bites?
I'm not going to focus on this interview too much, but it caught the attention of some.
I'm afraid of bee bites. That's scary. Do bees bite or they sting? Or does it depend on the bee? Don't they die when they sting you? Maybe that's why they bite you. Bees are smart. Smart stuff.
High-profile figures, including Stanley Kubrick's daughter and actress Maya Farrow, who both criticized the broadcast of someone clearly at such a vulnerable point in their life. I think, however, it was more indicative of the show.
Shelley, listen to me. Will you let me get you to some doctors?
I was a pretty girl. I was beautiful. I was 1987 Entertainer of the Year for the Southern California Cable Television Association.
Will you let me get you to some doctors and get your...
Not as a prisoner, you're not.
No, of course not. You can come and go anytime you want.
What was wrong with the doctors I had?
We haven't seen doctors for a good while.
But I'd rather see my doctor than your doctor.
Well, but I got some really good doctors.
You do?
I do.
Yeah? Can I fix this?
I don't know if McGraw is charged.
Can I fix what?
Really good doctors.
You do?
I do.
Yeah? Can I fix this?
Incredible.
I don't know.
So, like, listen, from what we were being shown, the thing that makes me uncomfortable is he's a bit aggressive, I suppose. But I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with it. And the whole, like, why can't I see my own doctors? It just sounds like she's not going. So he's like, oh, let me see if I can help her. I don't see him trying to act in bad faith here. Her hair is stinging and feeling pain. That's being old. That is part of being old. But there's very clearly something going on with her. She's frustrated. She's stressing, bro. You know, she's only in her 50s. Yeah, she looks a little rough for even 50. You know, she's just stressing. So I can understand that. I can understand the desire to try to help.
If McGraw is charging by the hour, but this interview almost seems too motivated to get Shelley help.
Was he?
Can I fix this?
I don't know if McGraw is charging by the hour.
I doubt he was charging anything. It's an interview.
But this interview almost seems too motivated to get Shelley help. And I use the quotation marks there because help is subjective depending on the person. What might help one person isn't guaranteed to help another person. Throughout the interview, Dr. Phil seems determined to get Duvall to this one.
Sure, but like going and seeking medical and mental health help, that will help everybody. It's just like how that manifests is different. That's why he's trying to bring him to doctors. So far, I don't really see him doing anything inherently wrong.
In particular, which ultimately fails because once she's there, Duvall is not comfortable receiving help there. And at the end of the episode, he reveals that they're supporting her at home anyway. Dr. Phil runs from a manual that dictates
Oh, what do you mean they're supporting her at home? What does that mean?
Operations regardless of the individual. It's manufactured to maintain those.
Because he was saying like she doesn't even go see her own doctor. So like who is supporting her? Like the show? Like what does that mean?
Narratives. What happens when that aspect is pushed to obsessive degrees? There have been a couple of instances in the past where the producers of Dr. Phil were accused of facilitating people's problems rather than helping them.
Dr. Phil staffers bail on show guidelines. A rep from Phil McGraw's syndicated Talk It Out Fresh Fest says certain staffers, in anticipation of featuring the case on Dr. Phil, went beyond the show's guidelines by bailing out one of the 8 Central Florida teens jailed on suspicion of participating in a videotape beating of a female classmate. Okay, why would they really want that content, huh?
In 2008, a member of the Dr. Phil team...
Oh, she was 66 at the time? All right, well, thank you for fact-checking that. You fucking dick.
of violent teens bail, and although they subsequently cancelled the story, let's be frank here, it was no secret the lengths the show would go to get a scoop. Yet another high-profile case.
That's what happens, bro. Especially once you get that taste. A lot of people, they'll get like a viral video and they'll just chase that boom, 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 boom over and over again, right? Like, a situation will happen where you justifiably pull somebody on. I guess they'll say Danielle Bregoli. They have that whole episode, and they're looking for more Danielle Bregolis, and they're trying to sensationalize a person into that, person just for more attention. That's where you start to fall off there, brother.
Seemed to take the biscuit, and it once again involved another public figure. This is Todd Herzog. He was a victor of the 15th season of Survivor, set in China. However, after his success, he had struggled with alcoholism, during which his mother had contacted Dr. Phil for help with her son's problem. However, when he turned up to the studio, he was intoxicated to the point of incomprehension. McGraw was sure to bring attention to this and the serious danger he was in.
So yeah, I'm okay. Because I didn't know this was happening right now.
You're not okay.
No.
You said you're okay, but you're not okay. You're not even almost okay.
No.
Do you know who I am?
Yeah, of course I know who you are.
You are here because I wanted to talk to you because, in my opinion, you're killing yourself, man.
Damn. Hold on a second.
Judo, he was an alcoholism. He was a victor at the biscuit, and it once again involved another public figure. This is Todd Herzog. He was a victor of the 15th season of Survivor, set in China. However, after his success, he had struggled with alcoholism, during which his mother had contacted Dr. Phil for help with her son's problem. However, when he turned up to the studio, he was intoxicated to the point of incomprehension. McGraw was sure to bring attention to this and the serious danger he was in.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm okay. Because I didn't know this was happening right now.
Seems like almost like an intervention, but okay.
You're not okay.
No.
You said you're okay, but you're not okay. You're not even almost okay.
No.
Do you know who I am?
Yeah, of course I know who you are.
You are here because I wanted to talk to you because, in my opinion, you're killing yourself, man. Well, I want to get a fix on you right now so I know what I'm dealing with. This is a breathalyzer. I want you to blow into it really hard for 5 seconds when I tell you so I can see where you are.
Once again, after a brief consultation, Dr. Phil emphasizes how he's going to find him help. And to be fair, in this case, it's probably not the wrong sort of...
Yeah, I mean, like, I that's nothing wrong with that. I mean, finding somebody help. It seems like he probably does want to actually help them and then also monetize it. But, guess you can't win them all.
Help. And after receiving treatment, Todd makes his appearance on the show as a sober individual and expresses his gratitude for the intervention.
Oh, I guess so. It worked. So yeah, okay. I feel a little air of negativity in TRO's perspective here, and I feel like it's unwarranted so far. So yeah.
However, a couple years later, in 2016, he appears on the show once more after relapsing.
Well, that's pretty common. It's unfortunate, it's difficult to get people to actually stay sober of their addictions. So it's unfortunate. I mean, like, yeah, it's unfortunate.
At 2:30 this morning, you had a blood alcohol level of 0.432.
That's a lot, I think. I think 0.08 is the standard. That's like legally drunk or whatever, or over the limit. Or at the limit?
Yeah.
And
1 week score is 0.601.
Yeah, that's
death.
That's death.
That's death.
It's always somewhat tragic to see a person struggling so much on live TV. However, in 2017, Herzog went public with the claim that his struggle had been orchestrated by the Dr. Phil producers who planted a bottle of vodka in his dressing room during both interventions.
I show up to the studios and I'm sober. I'm hurting a lot and I'm shaking. My dad was there and I went and talked to him in his dressing room and I was completely sober. And then they pull me into my dressing room and there was 2 liters of vodka and like some Red Bulls and orange juice and stuff like that. Being unsupervised by my parents, I drank the entire bottle. And then at some point somebody gave me a Xanax. They said, this will calm your nerves. And so I had been drinking and took a Xanax, which I've never taken Xanax before in my life. And I know that can be a deadly combination, so why it was given to me, I don't know. I get that it's a television show and that they want to show the pain that I'm in. However, what would have happened if I died there, I
mean, it might have happened. It also may have not happened. I mean, I interesting that he makes the claim. But listen, it could absolutely be true. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him. even if it wasn't Dr. Phil, you know, the TV show runner, blah blah blah, the people to do something like really fucked up like that. But then at the same time, I also wouldn't put it past somebody who struggles with, like, you know, wow, this thing just fucking okay. Somebody who struggles with alcohol, but then also is somebody who, you know, was on Survivor or whatever it was, which means that they have the motivation to want to be very famous, to lie. I'm just being real with you. So, I mean, it's possible, especially if it starts becoming trendy to speak negatively of Dr. Phil. Like, it's, you know, it's possible that it's not even genuine or sincere. We don't really know. So you can prove it.
This seemed to paint a very different portrait than the one that was perceived, and in both cases, Duvall and Herzog seemed to tell us something extremely different about the intent of McGraw and those around him.
Oops, I didn't do that, but okay.
The irony is that perfect television is often the moments that probably shouldn't even be there. People want something that is raw and real, and often that can't happen naturally in front of a TV camera. So when it does, it's all the more powerful. In the case of Herzog and Duvall, what we saw were two people who were clearly suffering from something serious, and its coverage, for many, was extremely riveting. However, in both cases, it's fair to question how fair it truly was.
Is this gonna be a murder? Are you gonna murder me? It looks deserted. Leave me alone. I don't want to be murdered. We would never murder you. You stop driving, and I'm gonna have a cigarette. Okay.
Who's the person with her?
Be murdered. We would never murder you.
Is that like somebody that's like a trusted relative or something? It's what it kind of seems like.
You stop driving, and I'm gonna have a cigarette. Okay. Fire hazard area or no fire hazard area. Okay. If you're smoking.
Have I seen the Pokemon advocating for a bill to be passed? I mean, you can send it to me on Twitter or Instagram. Excuse me. I'll take a look.
Patrick Reynolds warned me about you.
In the case of Duvall, trying to ship her off to some facility that may not have been suitable for her problems. In the case of Herzog, allegedly exploiting a vulnerability.
It also may have been suitable. I mean, I don't know. Like, this particular speculation, it's just not really, you know, it's not really resonating with me. So far, I don't really see any of this as necessarily reasonable. I mean, I suppose it's reasonable to bring it up, but I don't think that they're necessarily reasonable criticisms. I don't really see anything like, you know, we're talking about people who are struggling with some kind of issue. Like, one's an addiction issue and one's a mental health issue, and they're not like, and they don't want to get the help. But like, well, I think it's a reasonable assumption to make that the woman that was next to Dr. Phil, or excuse me, next to her, was like some kind of like a person close to her. It was almost like an intervention. So okay.
For drama, and although I cannot comment for certain on the verity of the claim, is it not suspicious that despite being surrounded by a full TV crew, a family who probably didn't want him to consume alcohol, and experts who were supposedly worried for his health, that he still turned up drunk? I understand if you can't completely control a person, but if the safeguarding measures were up to scratch, like producers had claimed in other interviews surrounding this matter, there is no way he should have arrived at that studio intoxicated, and yet it happened twice.
Oh, I mean, did they facilitate his arrival? I mean, when he's at home, he may have snuck a drink. I'm not saying that I mean, it's possible that, you know, somebody put that in his dressing room. It's also possible that he's a liar. I'm just saying, like, I'm just saying, there's only so much they can do.
In both of these high-profile situations, it seems the authenticity was merely a front for something more manufactured, a conflict that wasn't necessary for the discourse that everyone seems so concerned about, but more so allow producers to raise stakes and dramatic narratives that emphasize the urgency of the situations that these guests found themselves in. And to be honest, if McGraw hadn't landed himself in the controversy while consulting Britney, the producers may well have done a similar thing with her. Dr. Phil's handling of high-profile individuals was what initially drew the most controversy. After all, they're the ones who most often have a platform to speak out if they experience maltreatment. However, as with other situations I acknowledged earlier, it's very hard to say how far this went back, and it's doubtful that it was an isolated incident, and other stories suggested they weren't.
I thought Dr. Phil was going to save my daughter, and it did not happen.
This is Joelle. She's a mother who brought her pregnant daughter on the show to hopefully get some help for her heroin addiction. She claims she was promised round-the-clock supervision. However, when her daughter began to detox, she didn't receive that.
Okay. Okay.
After about 4 hours, Caitlin decided that she was going to leave, and we needed to go to get her something so that she would not withdraw because it would hurt the baby at that point.
Not receiving help for 4 hours at a hospital and fearing for the safety of the baby, Joelle felt she had no other option but to get her daughter immediate relief from heroin, at which point they were transported to Skid Row with a camera person who filmed the entire ordeal.
They're arriving now.
Okay, hold on a second.
Caitlin decided that she was going to...
So once in Los Angeles taped the show, Caitlyn began going through withdrawal. So first of all, this is like a really fucked up thing. I don't know the exact doctor advice for this, but I know that like I know that when women are addicted to cigarettes, they're actually advised not to quit cigarettes when they're pregnant because the shock on the body could fuck the kid up, right? So it's actually really fucked. Either way, it sounds like she was taken to a hospital when they were in Los Angeles to tape the show, and then the girl decided to leave. What is Dr. Phil supposed to do? At that point, she's kind of assuming a risk. You could say that the camera shouldn't have been there, but like very clearly she should have stayed in the hospital. So I don't know what the expectation was of Dr. Phil if they decided not to do that. Are you fucking kidding me? You can't. Oh, I fucking. Oh my God, I'm gonna die.
After about 4 hours, Caitlyn decided that she was going to leave, and we needed to go to get her something so that she would not withdraw because it would hurt the baby at that point.
Not receiving help for 4 hours at a hospital and fearing for the safety of the baby, Joelle felt she had no other option but to...
Not receiving help for 4 hours at a hospital. I don't know if you... I mean, I don't know what the hospital would do. I'd imagine they would just have to let her ride it out. I mean, there's not a whole lot that can be done. I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe they were backed up. I mean, that's possible. What is Dr. Phil supposed to do? I mean, if it was me, I'd be like, oh, you're fucking, you go to the hospital. Nothing I can do. I wouldn't want to take that risk on. I'd be like, yeah, go to the hospital. Stay in the hospital, you know?
Get her daughter immediate relief from heroin, at which point they were transported to Skid Row with a camera person who filmed the entire ordeal.
They're arriving now.
Okay. They returned to the Dr. Phil studios. From there, they traveled to Skid Row with the Dr. Phil staffer. What is Skid Row? So Caitlyn could buy drugs. Oh. Why did they go to buy drugs? So why did you go get your daughter drugs? Wait, why are we criticizing Dr. Phil? Because there was a person there? I mean, they do stuff like that all the time, I suppose. Like, why you're getting your daughter you left the hospital to get your daughter drugs. You're an enabler and a bad mom. I'm not trying to be a fucking asshole, but like, we're gonna criticize Dr. Phil for this? What are you talking about? What are you fucking... That's insane. This is like fucking insanity. I don't even know how to respond to this.
Scared to death right now. Caitlyn made a contact very quickly. I gave her money and she went on her way. And
why did you do that?
30, 45 minutes later, we found her. She was happy, high, and we went back to the hotel at that point.
This was subsequently brought up on the show, where McGraw chastises the mother for leaving the hospital and heading to Skid Row, which obviously is not a safe place.
You think since her mom is a nurse, she would take her to the hospital, but instead, they made a drug run.
I just wanted...
Yeah, bad mom. Her mom's an enabler. It's probably one of the reasons why she's on drugs. I'm not trying to be rude. That's really sad. But holy fuck, you took your kid to get drugs. What is Dr. Phil supposed to do at that point? You let your daughter leave and then manipulate you into getting her more drugs. Okay, cool.
To help her feel better.
So that baby is high on heroin right now.
Yep, probably.
I can alert LAPD before you walk off of this stage.
Should.
So you think forcing someone to get help like that is the best way?
I don't.
What you think forcing someone to get the reality is she's probably beyond help. But like, what do you mean? You're gonna criticize Dr. Phil? What is he supposed to do? You're on drugs. I don't understand. How are we criticizing? Get away from me, Tornado. How are we gonna criticize Dr. Phil for this? This is actually fucking insane to me. I'm actually shitting and farting right now. This is nuts. This also fucking sucks, playing range.
Give it what you think. I'm concerned about your baby.
In this case, though, the mother claims she was cornered with how to treat the situation and told that if she had questioned aspects of the show that had caused her to take such measures, her daughter wouldn't be able to receive the help that she needed.
There was a lot of...
Okay, you left the hospital. Did they tell you to do that? Because unless they tell you to do that, then you have no argument here. I don't know. It sounds like a fucking... I think Dr. Phil's more innocent than I thought. But okay.
Of manipulation, telling us what to say, telling us how to act, telling us what to do.
You could also call that advising. What were they telling you to do? Because that just sounds like, yeah, they advised me to go to the hospital and I left. Yeah, they should. That's what I'd say too. Listen, we're not going to put you on the show unless you go through these steps. Now, unless you think that those steps were bad, well, like poorly intentioned, malicious, manipulative, but it just sounded like they were trying to get help, and now you're just crying. And your daughter is probably complaining when she was going through withdrawal. Maybe she was, and over-sensationalizing it, and you fell for it. And you're probably the reason why your kid's on drugs. Like, I'm not trying to be a fucking asshole, but holy fuck.
I don't have an answer for why I did what I did. I just wanted to help her feel better.
Yeah, well, you did a bad thing.
Question anything he's saying, or he could not give her the help that she needed.
Okay.
How much is going to have to be lost before you pull your head?
This is it.
I'm not going to mince my words here. That's a threat. There is no two ways about it. This person isn't a celebrity. They're not copiously wealthy. What Dr. Phil is offering these people is a chance to receive serious help. To hold that over someone's head if they don't comply with your request to make sure Philip's reputation remains unscathed is extremely inhumane. Now, once
if you take her word at face value, sure, maybe. It sounds to me like they're like, hey, listen, you have to do these particular things if you want to get help because your daughter's a fucking drug addict with a baby and we want to help her. Not everything is a threat. I don't... I mean, I'm not trying to be a fucking asshole, but we're just taking these words that these people are saying at like face value as if like, yeah, this is definitely true. I would be very apprehensive about doing that.
Once again, this is just an allegation, but it certainly fits in with this idea that the producers were chasing a story and a reputation rather than prioritizing the help they often advocated for on the show. In the case of Joelle and her daughter, even if it didn't happen exactly as reported, they were still escorted to Skid Row with a cameraman. If there was
the mother decided to take the kid out of the hospital, her daughter out of the hospital, get her drugs, and like, why are we like, yeah, Dr. Phil's cameraman shouldn't have done that. Who's at greater fault though? Is it the drug addict that wanted to leave the hospital to get drugs, the mom who enabled her to do that, or the guy who's filmed the camera part? Who's really at fault here? Because I feel like cameraman's number 3 in the fault list. Okay, I feel like he's like number 3 on that fault list there. But okay, you know, let's blame Dr. Phil for your horrible fucking parenting.
For medical supervision, like the Dr. Phil show claimed, how the hell did they end up there? Responding to the claim,
because they can't force her to stay. Like, what do you mean? How did they end up there? Are you saying that they should have called the cops? Sure. Fine. But I mean, documentaries like this happen all the time, so I don't really care. I'm not trying to be rude. You know, like what do you, so here's the question. What would you have wanted him to do? Call the cops? Maybe. That's a good idea, I suppose. Or what? Like what's the argument here though? You know, like what would you have done? I don't know. They filmed it. They probably shouldn't have, but like the biggest issue is the fucking shitty parent and the fucking shitty kid.
James Martin Greenberg, a psychologist who is head of the show's personal affairs, stated that officials only agreed to do the show if Joelle agreed to be responsible for her daughter's withdrawal, which seems really weird.
That doesn't seem weird at all. Why would they take responsibility for a fucking drug addict? That's a huge liability. What do you mean that's weird?
Weird from my perspective. Sure.
Why would it be weird? It's a legal issue. How is that weird? Oh, I'm gonna fucking die. This tank is fucking dumb. It's pissing me off. I'm leaving. Why is that weird? That's not weird at all. That's normal. Like, the show has legal responsibilities, and you know that because you even said that maybe one of the reasons why he gave up his clinical psychologist, whatever bullshit, is because he didn't want to be liable. First, you're speculating he didn't want to be liable. You know that there's a legal aspect. Of course, if her mother agreed 100% of responsibility for managing her daughter's health and possible withdrawal, yeah. Like, of course. Why would they take that responsibility on? Especially since it's so difficult to get somebody off of drugs. Come on. This is a ridiculous story.
That's what the medical professionals would be for. And if you think someone is at any risk, you wouldn't bring them down at all. Washing your hands of contractual culpability doesn't suddenly absolve you of any moral obligation. Maybe as an entertainer, that's a risk you would take, but certainly not.
I mean, like, they can only do so much. And they already have them, basically, the shitty mother is already complaining that they acted irresponsibly. So, like, what are they supposed to do? And they're not going to take that burden on.
As a person whose job is to keep people safe. As a head of personal affairs, Greenberg is surprisingly bad at PR, including providing seemingly confused and conflicting responses to claims about patient safeguarding. Most of his responses reek of arrogance and dismissiveness towards the complaints they've been receiving, though I'll give them credit because they do still emphasize personal responsibility. In saying that these people are not willing to take responsibility for themselves. But I think it would be valid to...
In the interview, then Greenberg said that the show was not a medical facility and did not have responsibility to monitor guests. Sure, yeah.
The question in this case, and say, is it not them who are not willing to take responsibility? In attempting to explain why they may not be aware of whether a guest is at risk from their cravings, Greenberg states, and I love this one, addicts are notorious for lying, deflecting, and trivializing, but if...
Yes, that's actually very true. Have you ever... Like, I'm not trying to be an asshole. I've met addicts before. So... Yeah. So, yeah.
They're at risk when they arrived, and they were at risk before they arrived.
That's 1,000% true. It's the unfortunate reality, but addicts lie a lot to get things. I mean, it's sad. It's really sad if you've ever talked to an addict. And sometimes they don't just lie. Sometimes they're telling the truth, but like they don't hold true to that like truth after they're fucking like a day later. It's crazy. It's unfortunate, but this is true. I feel like maybe you haven't talked to an addict before.
I've been trying to save the opinion part for later, but this is just such a rotten thing to say. Sure,
that's true.
Sometimes addicts struggle with being open about their problems.
No, it's the addicts will flat out lie and steal things when they're like super into an addiction. They'll say whatever they have to say to get out of a situation. I mean, I'm not trying to be fucking rude. It's unfortunate, but it's the truth. It's a sad truth, but that person is correct. Just because you're uncomfortable with that truth, like the world isn't like sunshines and rainbows and farts. You know what I mean? Like it's not this an amazing place. Like it's unfortunately true, man. It is very difficult to get addicts off of their drugs, and they will lie a lot. You don't understand. You're a little disconnected on this one. You don't really know what you're talking about here, but okay.
But the fact they came to your show probably means they want help, and it doesn't mean they're not deserving of it. For you to make a general ad hominem attack,
that doesn't mean that they can magically help somebody. It's hard to get somebody help on this. They have to actually want it because they're going to struggle. You're never not an addict. Once you're an addict, you're always an addict, and it's a lot of work to keep your shit together. And I respect the hell out of anybody who's an addict and who, you know, doesn't drink anymore, doesn't do drugs, because that's hard. But you're never not an addict anymore. Like it's not like you're like, oh, I'm cured, I can drink a beer again. No, you can't, or you'll just relapse. It's hard. The world is harsh, and I feel like you just don't understand that.
To deflect responsibility from the show is cowardly, and I would expect better from a psychologist. If you're aware of that behavior, then surely that is reason for you to heighten the supervision, not just leave them to their own devices and then shrug your shoulders. The Dr. Phil show cannot guarantee the eternal safety of all who attend their show. However, they could at least ensure it on the premises. Instead, guests turned up drunk, trips to Skid Row were made with a camera crew, and the narrative of help was pushed to nauseating and even allegedly...
It's interesting that you said that guests showed up drunk, even though that guy claimed that he got drunk inside of... they supplied him alcohol, which means that you don't actually believe what he's saying either, but okay.
Threatening degrees. Sure, it was perfect TV, but what was happening behind the cameras? How truly helpful was that help?
I don't know if I'm feeling the druid. I don't want to play. I don't want to do like
I want the help, but I don't like the way this is going, but I don't think I ought to have to do this right here, but I don't think we ought to not be able to talk about this or that. There is no but. You either want the help or you don't. And if you want the help, you lean into it. And you don't get back here. There's no pass and go. You leave from here to there. That requires very specialized care that I think you deserve. I want you to have that help. I want this baby to have that help. I am offering you the best help, in my opinion, in the United States.
Right.
And
please.
But yes, nothing wrong with what he's doing.
Say yes. Stop talking to me.
I'm not here to be unfair or...
Yeah, that's exactly what he would have to say. First of all, so like parole officers, Dr. Phil is acting very aggressive, and it's like, but like that's something that like usually drug addicts and parole officers, they might actually need to be like very assertive, because they've already been giving thousands of yards of chances by their enabling mother, as we already know, right? That's number one. Number two, you have to go from here to there is 1000% necessary, because if she goes home, she could boom disappear. So he's saying you have to go from here to there or you don't get the help. That's normal, because if not, she might disappear or she might relapse again. One last time, I gotta do my drugs one last time before I get to my rehab. How many times people said that? Not even with drugs, cigarettes. This is my last cigarette. I'm gonna smoke the rest of this pack and I'm done. It's normal. This is normal behavior.
Or ignore the greater picture, and I do want to acknowledge that there are plenty of people who will credit the Dr. Phil show for the difference it has made in their lives. In discussing the subject of addicts on the show, Greenberg says the only change is they are one step closer to getting help, typically help they could not even come close to affording. Greenberg presents the help the show is offering as a privilege. Now, I know the health system is pretty broken and that in many ways it is a privilege to be seen so quickly. With that said, it's a mutual thing. Greenberg speaks like it's an act of charity, but really it's the least they can do for people who fuel their daytime ratings.
I guess. Okay.
Defending the show, Greenberg admits that appearing on Dr. Phil is a step towards receiving the assistance many typically desire to conquer their demons. But Dr. Phil isn't the endgame. He's the middleman, and the success of the TV show has given them the power to also find treatment for their subject. Now though, to touch on the fact that healthcare on this front can be very expensive, as Greenberg acknowledges, there is a financial factor behind the show, and Dr. Phil has never really ran on a patient-based formula. Yes, my friends, there is a mystery third beneficiary to the sort of service being offered by Dr. Phil, that being the treatment facilities that these people are sent to, many of whom advertise their
that could be a problem.
Relationship with the esteemed Dr. Phil. If certain people can afford it, these places have just been given the promotion for the help they offer. When a guest comes on, Dr. Phil will sometimes express to the viewers exactly what treatment facility that person is being sent to and the positive difference that it will make. Such promotions are like a sponsorship, really, and many media and even YouTube figures do sponsorships with.
Yeah, they probably get a discount on it. I mean, you could criticize the. You could definitely criticize. It's really just this is really a general critique on our healthcare system. More than anything else. Okay, but sure.
Some very curious companies, and most of us know that we need to take them with a grain of salt. Dr. Phil, like many people, is a guy who is attempting to acquire the bag. And honestly, there are worse things that he could promote.
If you're looking for something to do that's fun, relaxing, and good for your brain, I have a perfect way for you to take a much-needed break, and it's right on your phone for free. It's an app game called Solitaire Grand Harvest. Now, I have two...
Oh, okay. I didn't think he was doing that. That's funny, though. Okay.
Two guests here who say they play and love this game.
At the same time, such an endorsement does come with a degree of responsibility, especially given the sensitive subjects that are often handled. Was that due diligence being performed? Well, the show seems to have agreements with a few facilities for treatment, which Dr. Phil, of course, sings his praises about, and maybe they're perfectly qualified people, but there is a quite close relationship between Dr. Phil and a lot of these places. Now, one size never fits all, and there will always be people who will not find recovery in a treatment center. And although I think there have been instances where McGraw was a little too enthusiastic about specific clinics, see Duval, I understand that having a close relationship with specific places is probably for the best, as it would allow one to maintain the highest quality of treatment. However, was that high quality being delivered? The problem is that once you tie yourself to specific institutions, if the reputations of these places do come under scrutiny, it can reflect on you, even if you're not involved in the management of the facility itself. Obviously, there are factors that people can't be expected to be aware of. Yet over time, some believe this should have been fairly obvious.
Dr. Lawless, stand up, would you please? This is Dr. Frank Lawless, head of the Psychoneuroplasticity Center, which is a long, long way of saying they check people from A to Z.
The first query that one may raise is the actual suitability of many of these facilities for Dr. Phil. Now, McGraw hails from Texas, and many of his connections are from around that area, such as the Origins Clinic and the Arbor, both of whom have facilities in Big Philly's home state. Greenberg states that if a person requires medical attention, they will fly in the required medical personnel. However, there seems to be a bit of disconnect with this system. Although Herzog received his treatment from the Arbor, Steve Thomason, who is the director of the facility, stated that Herzog did not and could not have received supervision on the show from them because they're not licensed in California. In fact, Thomason states he completely regrets agreeing to working with the show in the first place and was so upset by the segment that he never agreed to work with them again. This doesn't mean that Herzog wasn't supervised, but it certainly created a disconnect between two entities that should be laboring towards a collective goal. If a company is required to regularly supervise individuals in California, should they not be licensed to do so in that state as well? Are there not more suitable alternatives?
I want to introduce someone to you. This is Mike Gurr down here. He's the executive director at the Meadows Ranch, and I've asked him to come here today because I've worked with Meadows for years, and they, in my opinion, are the best of the best, and I wanted you to have an opportunity to sit down and talk with them and see if you feel like this might be a good opportunity for you.
You can't exactly...
Well, it'd probably be like an infrastructure nightmare because that person would have to move to, like, what was it, Texas or whatever. That could be a problem. Sure, okay.
Blame Dr. Phil for involving prior business relationships in his present-day ventures, especially if he holds them in high regard like he regularly claims he does. However, business shouldn't really be the central matter of the TV show, yet that's what some believed it to be, particularly given Dr.
Sure, some believed it to be. It's pretty, like... hands-off wording here.
Okay. Phil's presence as a brand. The Boston Globe, who had published some of the most critical content of McGraw during his social media renaissance, touched on this in a 2017 article when covering the recent Dr. Phil path to recovery.
Dr. Phil says he rescued people from addiction. Others say his show puts guests at health risk.
Social media renaissance touched on this in a 2017 article when covering the recent Dr. Phil path to recovery VR headset marketing shebang.
You're going to see on the screens what Eric is seeing in the goggles. Now, this is
oh my God, is that fucking... is this VR porn that he's having him watch? Jesus, that's sexy.
Recorded. Okay, Eric, look up. Now look to your left.
Probably getting fucking nauseous. I remember when I first used a VR headset, I got fucking nauseous as hell.
This is what he's seeing. Now, what I've done here is I've put them in a bar situation. So while they're in rehab, they're sitting talking to me in a bar. Now they're sitting, and this is actually...
Why would you do that, Dr. Phil, you fucking idiot?
My backyard.
The Dr. Phil Path to Recovery VR headset is a system that supposedly aids addicts with an interactive form of therapy with the man himself. Although admittedly hard to establish, there is no epidemiological evidence to show that it is successful.
No, there isn't, but it's an interesting concept. I mean, I can respect the concept. It's just bizarre.
But the Boston Globe claimed that there was one distinctive benefit, that being the Dr. Phil namesake. In reports, one potential client had informed the publication that the selling point presented to them had been just that, being told by the vice president for product sales that our job is to get your phones to ring, and the admissions hopefully follow. In essence, if you use the product, Dr. Phil is more likely to involve you on the TV show. The crew at Dr. Phil swiftly denied this, citing the fact that only 2 centers that use the product had even been mentioned on the TV show, and they never made promises. Nevertheless, they evaded responding on the matter of the actual comments made by the sales VP, and their response doesn't really contradict the report. It was never claimed that any promises were made or that by the sales VP, and their response
how Dr. Phil's new addiction recovery venture trades on his TV show's marketing cloud.
Doesn't really contradict the report. It was never claimed that any promises were made or that a mention was guaranteed, and using a reference who had been mentioned thus far isn't proof against what will be mentioned in the future. Whether the VP was acting beyond his brief is certainly up for debate, but it's hard to doubt that comments were probably made. The Dr. Phil show always pursued the image of the program that was willing to put the mental health of its guests at the heart of its message. However, in many cases, it was clear that there was a conflict of interests, and what may be best for the show and those behind it may not be the best for the guests. And on closer analysis, in some cases, the places promoted were very questionable indeed.
Okay, I'm gonna go pee real quick.
I'll discuss this more soon, but I think besides obviously people who are suffering from substance issues, another extremely vulnerable group are the youth, in particular those who have been brought on by their parents, as it may not have been their own first course of action. Now, in many cases, when dealing with difficult children, adolescents, and even young adults, they're experiencing a lot of hormonal and developmental changes, something that Dr. Phil is quite aware of.
So I'm fed up with this. You continue to bring her into a hostile environment where somebody is pounding on her self-esteem, pounding on her self-worth, getting her to the point that she's lying in bed at 2 a.m. thinking my only way out is to end my life. What the hell is wrong with you, woman? Your job is to protect your child.
I'll probably discuss the morality involving young people in a bit, but for guests really as influential as a conversation with Dr. Phil may be, the main change is going to come from actually receiving treatment. And in that case, the centers are essential to making sure the chances of this happening are maximized. And although it won't work for everyone, these individuals are kept safe and well. Now, this time, Dr. Phil has recommended a few places, and for most adult facilities, there weren't too many controversies. But in the last few years, there has been a bit of disquiet about 2 institutes that McGraw has had long-term relationships with, both of which specialize in treating children with substance issues. The first is a place in Florida, oh dear, called Inspirations. They have been featured on the Dr. Phil show and have also coincidentally used the Dr. Phil Road to Recovery VR headset. In their appearances on the show,
I'm never going to get over this fucking weird VR thing. I honestly think that he means well, but it's so fucking bizarre. The Road to Recovery VR fucking headset, baby.
McGraw was highly complimentary about the work they were doing.
This is Karen Walsh. She's the owner of Inspirations for Youth and Families. It's the nation's leading family addiction treatment and dual diagnosis center, and affiliate of the Cove Center for Recovery in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
And fair enough, if they're doing that work, then they deserve to receive their due credit. However, for some, the evidence suggested otherwise. Beyond the owner's own legal issues, much of which happened during the years that Dr. Phil claimed to be working with them, there was a more concerning issue regarding the center itself.
We're at Inspirations for Youth and Families. And what we do is we work with teenagers and their families every day. And we help them to figure out how they're going to get past this point in their life where a teenager is struggling with drugs.
Now, it's important that I keep this in perspective. It's a challenge to treat anyone who may struggle with addiction, particularly if you're trying to put them back on the slope to a normal functioning life. They need guidance, but you can't afford to be too authoritarian. Therefore, it is possible that patients may flee the premises and need...
I mean, like, yeah, they need guidance, and you actually, in some instances, have to be very authoritative, actually. And for a lot of drug addicts, respond reasonably well to it. Being very authoritative. Yeah, I mean, it's not, yeah. It's kind of the truth. You can't be too much of a pussy. You know, you kind of have to lay into them sometimes a little more than, you know. There's obviously a balance that you're gonna have to create so you don't push them away, for sure. For sure. No Capricorn, no Cap, but you know, you kind of have to be careful of balance.
Needs to be found. With this in mind, Inspirations' record on this was a bit less than stellar, according to a private investigator who worked within this industry. In 2017, it was estimated that approximately 180 police reports for missing teenagers had been made in the space of the previous 2 years, some of whom went missing for days and others ending up on the wrong side of the law completely. To quote the PI, obviously there's a gap somewhere, a loophole somewhere in the system where they're just leaving. Since these articles, Inspiration doesn't appear to have received much coverage, and their video where their work was promoted has the comments disabled. How, with all this information available, it is fair to ask the question why Dr. Phil decided to characterize the institution as a leading family addiction center. How do you even know who's leading? Is there a leaderboard? If there is, I highly doubt Inspirations is near the top, but I digress. Inspirations is an example of a place that has some function but falters in its execution, which is pretty vital given the sort of people they're meant to be treating. And although nobody has come forward with any horror stories, it shouldn't have been too difficult to properly vet a place that deals with such a sensitive matter. However, as we'll see with our second...
I mean, yeah, it's possible that they're acting irresponsibly. It's also possible that might be something that's somewhat normal, is a lot of people running away. I really just don't know, but okay.
An example, that doesn't seem to be the Dr. Phil show's forte.
She's 14, she's got 3 tickets for drinking.
She blames those on me.
She has chased you down the hall with a bat. She is actually under house arrest. She poured water on your cell phone. You found her so drunk, she could barely stand, walk, or talk. So, I mean, see, we have an entitled generation here.
Maybe.
They think they're entitled to cars, cell phones, designer clothes, hairdos, makeup. Your responsibility
probably true, yeah.
is to provide these children with shelter and food. That's it.
In 2010, Dr. Phil came face-to-face with 2 challenging adolescent sisters, who he and many others felt were taking advantage of their parents and staged an intervention, sending them to a resort that we'll talk about in a little bit.
I look back at myself a couple months ago and I'm just disgusted at how I would act and how I treated my family. I thought I hated them, and actually it was just me hating myself, and I would take that out on them.
Despite the apparently successful treatment of the younger sister, the older sister was still acting out, much to the parents' dismay. However, against Dr. Phil's advice and the mother's opinion, the father did not want to send his daughter to an Aspen Group boarding school, as he felt it was not in their best interests, which led once again to Dr. Phil inviting them back on for further discussion on the matter.
Well, we have received hundreds and hundreds of message board postings, emails, and letters about my next guest. Now, here are just a few responses. I was so angry, I was throwing things at my television. This was the most infuriating show I have ever watched. This might be the first time I have actually yelled at my TV screen. Those aren't all from the same person.
This episode billed them as the most frustrating parents, and Dr. Phil's attitude seemed to reflect that, opening up the episode by quoting enraged viewers, and then proceeding to sit down with them and taking them to task on their failings, while spectators frothed at their mouth, a stark reminder of what happens when you do not listen to the esteemed Dr. Phil.
Well, here's what you said. I'm really disappointed that your show is only interested in supporting Aspen programs and not other highly qualified programs that could benefit my daughters.
I mean, who cares? I mean, you're going there for help. Their logic is like, oh, I like this place better. We kind of know how they operate. We think that they're better off, yada, yada, yada. That would be the kind of the way that they, maybe they're wrong, but that would be their logical on that one. So, yeah.
Obviously, what's beneficial for my daughters is secondary to what is good for the show and for Aspen. I understand that first and foremost, you have a business to run. Are you serious? Are you serious when you write this? This is offensive to me. I just have to tell you, when I read this, my initial reaction was, I'm done. We have an advisory board. It's like 20 people, the top minds in psychology, sociology, medicine. When we get a story, it goes out to our advisory board, and we ask them for input. One of the top therapeutic residential programs on the globe is the Aspen Group. So we reach out to them and say, hey, guys, will you help us here? We work with dozens of people all over the country. But the collective wisdom is that that's who we're going to contact here.
Other than outwardly admitting that he has a business arrangement and accusing the father of requesting financial support for his own preferences, despite the fact that he never seemingly wrote that, McGraw doesn't really provide much of a real response to the father as to why it's in this girl's best interest to attend a boarding school other than broad philosophical narratives and expressing how insulted he felt, how he consults...
I mean, okay. Listen, I mean, it's possible. I mean, what is the argument here? I mean, that's probably just what he thinks is the best way to operate. And that's pretty much it. I feel like it's not that deep. He probably just thinks that's the best way to operate, and he feels insulted by somebody who's like, oh, who the fuck are you? You're getting this free help, or whatever. I don't care if he's upset about, like, whatever.
All the experts, etc., etc., etc. Dr. Phil is the fucking best, whatever. The Aspen Group is one of the top residential therapeutic programs on the globe. How could you not send your child there?
Is your teen out of control? The Aspen Education Group can help you get that teen back on track. Now, Aspen's nationwide network of programs has been featured on my show for years, and they can help your family too. Now, you can call an Aspen consultant today to learn more about their outstanding residential and outdoor programs.
Okay. Well, a large majority of the Aspen Group's projects have been closed down or sold in the last decade. In fact, there's not a single boarding school still being operated by them, with a fair few scandals that were well known by the time that Dr. Phil went on his verbal crusade against the father, including...
Yeah, I mean, that's possibly because it's just not the right way to deal with kids. Maybe, you know, again, maybe I don't know why Aspen's being shut down. Maybe it's just a failed business venture. Maybe it's abusive. I don't really know. That doesn't mean that Dr. Phil knows or is complicit. Or more than anything else, I mean, that's something that we thought people needed back then. So maybe we were just wrong about that in general. But okay, sure.
One to a boarding school that resulted in an investigation that concluded that the agency had reasonable cause to believe that abuse or neglect occurred at the school 6 months before this episode. Another place, formerly known as Island View, has had...
I mean, it's super common. I forget what it's called, but like places in New York were so incredibly horribly abusive, and then that was just the status quo for people with like intellectual developmental disabilities. And now we're like, oh, that's not good. And now they put in protocols to make sure shit like that doesn't happen anymore. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying that like it's unfortunately somewhat common for this kind of fucking shit to happen. Or historically it's been common, right? And so they try to like operate in a way that reduces that, well, commonness, for lack of a better term. That's probably why they were shutting down, if anything. So yeah. You know.
So many controversies, it would be funny if the stories weren't deeply depressing, including one in which a girl was fully isolated for 58 days after running away, an isolation in which she had to rely on staff attention to even interact with anyone, which did have its occasional failings. Dr. Phil was even...
Yeah, that sounds pretty bad. It sounds like they're trying to isolate her so she didn't run away again. Doesn't mean it's good. It's like a lack of understanding of mental health issues and shit.
Sued relating to one of these stories a few years later, but came out on top that time.
I believe in these folks right here. I believe they have traction. If you want to get Alexis there, and Aspen is still willing, after all of this, and what I consider to be disrespect from you about their motives, then, you know, I will make that available to you.
I don't know. I feel maybe this whole Aspen Group gig isn't everything it's cracked up to be. And actually, whether by intent or not, the father was in the right. But the Dr. Phil's reputation preceded it. Dr. Phil knows what's best for your children. He has files on top of files. And if you're to suggest otherwise, you're giving in to your offspring's manipulative ploys that have driven a wedge between you and the rest of the family.
I mean, the problem is a lot, especially the person before, that one woman with the drug addict dog, total enabler. So yeah, he might have gotten it wrong. And that's the problem when you don't sit down and really talk to people for a more extended period of time. But like, yeah, these people can be very enabling. Right? So that's probably why he has that perspective there.
It's a shtick, and it's one that wasn't always completely applicable, particularly when the real-world evidence didn't exactly support what was being promoted. And when you're dealing with young people, that's not something that can be remedied. And with so many places of debatable standing, it was only a matter of time until one came to the forefront of public discussion.
Okay.
Turnabout Ranch in the wilds of Utah is a leading American brat camp. It's a real working ranch run by cowboys.
Many of you probably don't remember this or even know about it, but in the early 21st century, there was this series that had some international presence known as Brat Camp. It was most popular in the UK, where it ran for 5 seasons, but did have some counterparts in continental Europe and even a US series. As you can maybe guess, the premise was built around adolescents with behavioral and substance issues going to a camp and having those issues addressed. However, this wasn't any standard therapy center. This was more a wilderness camp.
They teach the kids the ways of the Wild West and believe a strict regime of chores, tough rules, and harsh punishments can turn bad kids into good kids.
I have all the compassion in the world for these people, for these kids, but I just lack a little sympathy because of the way their behavior is, and that's what we need to work on.
In the UK, the first season was such a resounding success, they decided to invest in a second series. However, the producers of this show decided to raise the stakes by casting more challenging teens with intensified drama. Upon hearing this, the ranch that was featured in the first series, Red Cliff Ascent, refused to host another series, stating that they were a treatment program, not a TV show. Completely fair. So the team behind Brat Camp set their sights on another location, this being Escalante, Utah, the home of a humble spot known as Turnabout Ranch. Turnabout Ranch is one of the many haciendas that have taken on the role of doubling up as a center for wilderness therapy. This sort of therapy is different to the traditional idea as such. It promotes living with the land, devoid of the privileges or luxuries that modern life has typically afforded us. However, Turnabout Ranch was certainly on the more austere side of these projects. It wasn't Malibu, to say the least.
Everybody get up now. The slumber party's over, get up. Quit talking, everybody down here now.
Slumber party's over, baby.
Jesus. Foul language, not appropriate. Foul language, not appropriate. No
Kill
talking. You're going to spend 3 days out there.
No
It's
foul
going to be
language.
3 of the
Kill
worst
that
days you
guy.
spend a long time in your life. You're going to hate every second of it. There's going to be a lot of tears, a lot of emotions.
Okay.
So if you want to make it 5 days, it's your choice. But I'm not going to put up with it.
In most American camps, the impact stage is used to physically...
Yeah, so like these things don't usually work. These types of protocols don't usually work particularly well. We thought, you know, this scared straight stuff, it just doesn't work. The ranch idea might not be bad. It might work when you're there, when you're being like, you know, heavily watched and whatnot. Problem is that kind of breaks down when you're not being heavily watched and things kind of devolve. And that's really where the problem kind of comes in for a lot of this stuff. It's unfortunate, but I don't think that it makes them bad people, you know?
Exhaust rebellious kids into being more compliant. But at Turnabout, they have a unique strategy. For 3 whole days, the kids are made to stay in a small stone circle in total silence.
In hindsight, it's hard not to understand why these sorts of shows aren't being aired today. They're a pretty cruel form of therapy, and although some people did manage to turn their lives around, others didn't, and one former contestant of another series even died in 2009. How these sorts of residencies continued long after...
Well, why? Was it because of them, or did it just happen to pass away? It's unfortunate regardless, and just like, what's the implication here, you know? That's my bigger question.
The end of the TV shows that documented their methods. In fact, Turnabout in particular went on to be one of the most popular resorts for teens featured on a popular daytime show. I wonder what that show could be.
From the Aspen Education Group, she's one of many groups that we work with. She works with Turnabout Ranch.
Dr. Phil has always made a point of not approaching people from the same perspective that many TV show hosts did. His conversations with troubled people always staged more like an intervention rather than an interrogation, though sometimes the former did seep into the latter. With this in mind, although Dr. Phil did want people to take responsibility for their actions, it wasn't like they weren't deserving of humane treatment and sympathy. However, those who were most troubled, he sent them to Turnabout Ranch. That in many ways seemed very much against what he regularly preached on the show. Turnabout Ranch wasn't a particularly friendly place. It was the sort of place where if you struggled more, you'd receive more severe treatment, as documented in Brat Camp and in testimonies by others. Yet in 2010, Turnabout Ranch made its debut on the Dr. Phil Show with an inspirational segment featuring former guests and a softly spoken rancher.
Being here helped me find happiness.
When Elena first arrived here, she was very resistant.
I was furious. Like, I hate everyone.
She really turned and made some major progress.
After a couple of days, I was like, wow, it is my fault. I got myself in this situation.
She really shines as one of our leaders, and she takes a lot.
Well, good for her for the therapy working for her. I mean, like, you know, I don't know how successful it usually is, but...
a lot of pride in what she does on.
Ironically enough, this debut clip featured the girls who I mentioned earlier, most notably Elena, the younger sister who seemed much more receptive to the ranch's treatment. The ranch was presented as a hands-on getaway where youngsters could build a closer relationship to the wildlife and garner a greater appreciation for those around them. It seemed pretty positive. However, as Elena's older sister showed, it wasn't a formula that worked for everyone. In spite of this, though, McGraw & Co. proceeded with a pretty close partnership over the following years, sending many troubled teens here, leading up to arguably our most high-profile case, Danielle Bregoli.
Why don't you want to go to the ranch?
I'd rather go home and just go back to school, do what I gotta do.
Are you going to resist going?
I have to go from here?
I believe so.
Y'all got 5 seconds. This camera smell on my face before I punch both of y'all in your mouth. I swear to God on everything. Y'all better both get these cameras from my face. I ain't playing with none of y'all right now, bro.
Danielle Bregoli was always a bit of an exceptional individual, and after her appearances...
So, like, so far, we have a kid that obviously isn't going to want to go to this, like, camp. She's like, oh, do I have to do it? That sounds to me like she's trying to avoid doing it because, you know, she doesn't want to, obviously, which doesn't sound particularly profound. But, like, her saying, like, oh, well, can I just go to school and start doing my thing again? No, you can't, because that clearly you demonstrated that you simply won't. That's the biggest problem there. Yeah, that's pretty much where that comes from. It's like you aren't going to do that. Yeah, okay.
On the Dr. Phil show, McGraw felt there was no other option than to send her to the Turnabout Ranch. After all, it was always his answer to those he viewed as the entitled generation. Bregoli was a person who continuously undermined Phil, and although...
I mean, yeah, she was a shit kid with a shit mom, probably. That's probably why she's such a shit kid with bad parents. Of course. Of course it's gonna
those who tried to help her, and as a last resort, perhaps a more challenging environment would aid her outlook. So at the end of 2016, she spent 4.5 months in Turnabout Ranch, and whatever she experienced there ultimately didn't have any lasting impact, as not too long after, she appeared back on the Dr. Phil show, ever defiant in her nature.
When you were at Turnabout, you said that you'd learned that material things didn't mean as much anymore.
That was just a show, damn. That was just so I can get out of there.
Like I said before, those things don't usually tend to work in any long-term capacity. Just like a lot of you know, drug preventative programs don't work, especially when they're religious centered. Because like once you go back into the real world, you know, when you're not like super around religion, like if you're somebody who's not particularly religious, probably means people around you aren't particularly religious. And then what ends up happening is you go home and shit changes. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it works really well when everybody's religious, but when you don't have that religious structure, right? So it's kind of like that. When you don't have that, like, incredibly, when you don't really have many options, it's, you know, obviously easier to, you know, I guess you'd say make better decisions, for the lack of a better term. And that's kind of where they are at that point. Right? So yeah, of course, it's not going to have like a long-term impact, or at least not a long-term positive impact. So
Let me put it this way. Y'all could put me in the program for 6 years and I'm gonna come out the same person I came in.
How is it being back home?
I don't know, it's just home.
What do you want to tell Dr. Phil?
What I told him last time. Dumb my
What do you want to see happen on the show this time?
This time I won't be throwing water at nobody, I'll be throwing hands at somebody.
By then, it should have been clear that the Turnabout Ranch didn't really function for everyone, but upon her return, it was framed like the failure of such therapy was Bregoli's own fault, when in reality, it was clear that the Dr. Phil format wasn't ever effective for someone so aware of their own media presence like Bregoli.
I mean, listen, I would be a little bit apprehensive about leaning too much. Okay, listen, bro, she's a bad kid, and the reality is she came from a bad mom who doesn't know how to deal with her shit, and I could be sympathetic to that. But let's not lean too much into shitting on Dr. Phil for doing what he thought was the right thing to do. You know what I mean? Let's not go too far into it. Because, I mean, come on. Come on, bruh. You know what I mean? Come on.
She knew what the point of Turnabout Ranch would be. Why would she conform to those expectations when her whole existence is based on rebellion? Not many people stop to think that maybe Bregoli wasn't to blame. Phil would probably suggest the fact that she seemed to behave better at Turnabout Ranch meant that it must be the fault of the home environment. But if it genuinely worked...
Well, yeah, I mean, like... Technically, sure, a little bit of the fault of the home environment, like because the home environment can't adhere to like the protocols that they were put in place. But that's somewhat unrealistic. Again, she got fucking, she basically got robbed by her like shit family, who just didn't do a particularly good job at raising her. It's kind of the truth there. So, fuck.
In transforming Bregoli's mindset, a change in environment wouldn't affect that. She just cottoned on to the fact that if she didn't cause as much disruption, they'd likely be friendlier towards her. However, that's not a philosophy adopted by everyone. You see, in the time between 2010 and 2017, Turnabout Ranch had been involved in numerous controversies, including a lawsuit which alleged torture, another patient that claimed a covered-up sexual assault case, and probably the most significant situation, an actual homicide that occurred during Danielle Bregoli's time at Turnabout Ranch. Clay Brewer, a disturbed teen who had been sent there to receive treatment, attacked a staffer with a blunt object who subsequently succumbed to their injuries. This was during the controversial circle therapy shown earlier, which isolates individuals and is supposed to give them time to think about their lives. Within the wrong environment, it is completely valid to see how this would also be detrimental to an individual. Now, it should be clear that when something awful happens, there has to be a level of responsibility accepted by the individual, even if they're a minor. But there also has to be some question about how, with all this considered, Bregoli was meant to come back the happy-go-lucky teen next time. If this was just going to be swept under the rug and people were going to act like patients should just take it in their stride, then they probably had another thing coming. And eventually they did. The 21st century definitely prompted us to take a different perspective on talk shows in general, and the tabloid genre was no exception, especially given that it often generated the most controversy out of any form of that entertainment.
I've heard some crazy stories over the years, but one topic that keeps me scratching my head is when women fake being pregnant.
Okay, so this is Shane, and he says gay people are disgusting and weak. Right here, we've got Greg. Greg says that he is terrified of gay people.
Even in the early days of the genre, instances had occurred that raised questions about the ethics of this content, most notably in 1995, when on an episode of the Jenny Jones shows, Scott Amateur, a gay man, had expressed love for their male friend Jonathan Schmitz. While this confession was seemingly brushed off at first by the male friend, 3 days later, Amateur died at the hands of him. Lawsuits...
Dang. That's unfortunate, man. I told this a couple times before, but like I had a gay friend who like liked me a lot, and they kept touching me inappropriately, so I got really pissed off, and I had to intervene, if you know what I'm saying. I had to tell them to stop, and get a little physical with them. Unfortunate stuff. Not a bad guy, just not particularly good to me, I suppose. Not really very good to me. A little bit of a meanie head. Did the same thing to my friend too. Hey, desperate for love, guys. Desperate for love. Am I right? We're all just looking for love, baby.
An interview subsequently revealed that the producers of the show had misled Schmitz into thinking that his admirer was a woman, while being aware of his history of mental disturbance and alcohol/substance abuse. Although not solely responsible for Amateur's death, there was little doubt that the actions of the show provoked a tragedy while disregarding a culture that was still very hostile towards people of differing sexual preferences. It was clear that when dealing with such sensitive topics, there was a lack of diplomacy in the pursuit for ratings, and this could easily have negative consequences. Nonetheless, this also worked to the genre's advantage, as it purported to show the uglier side of humanity. Therefore, certain incidents were going to be inevitable. Whether it was even fair to show these in the first place is a question that I'll get to later. But in cases such as Jeremy Kyle, it was clear that mistreatment of people was so commonplace because it was expected. And in both cases of Jones and Kyle, these shows were only ever fully reprimanded when someone actually died. Hell, the Jenny Jones show continued for an additional 8 years after the death of the aforementioned guest. Dr. Phil was different though.
You've got to miss siblings. You've got to miss those that
I think about it every day. Like, I miss my twin sister, I miss my brother, I miss all of them, really.
You don't have to miss Abba because she's here. Abba, come on out.
Abba, is that you?
Oh, that's nice.
Although he wasn't afraid to tackle the tough subjects, he still did it with the narrative of helping and supporting these people who he knew, as a professional, were still encountering some form of struggle regardless of what they may have done. Therefore, in spite of the space that he operated in, Dr. Phil still had a reputation to uphold. And as someone who had been under fire for the past few years and embroiled in lawsuits, this was certainly going to be a challenge. The era that we live in is also quite different to that of 1995. The online world definitely enabled an interconnectivity that allowed people to spread their messages more effectively. And by establishing himself as an online presence, thanks to the help of platforms like YouTube and those who existed there, he also opened himself up to criticism from the platform, and by 2021, it had long been brewing. The thing about YouTube is that it's a two-way street. If you have a public spat or altercation where you platform that person, there are very few plugs that can be pulled on another person's ability to broadcast publicly, and you could very easily provide them a platform through your own actions. This was exactly the case with Danielle Bregoli, who by 2021 went by the name of Bad Baby and was well known outside of YouTube. However, in April, she returned to the platform that immortalized her with the intent on presenting our esteemed TV host with an ultimatum.
So, Dr. Phil, I'm going to give you from now till April 5th to issue an apology, not only to me, but to Hannah and any other child that you sent to Turnabout or any other program like this. And if you don't, I'm gonna handle things my way. Somewhere in the middle of August, I went on the Dr. Phil show, and my mom and my grandma knew they were sending me here. I didn't know I was going. I went school shopping right before because the school was supposed to start when I got home from LA from doing the show. So part of the whole Dr. Phil show is they send these kids to either Turnabout or these other programs that are also in Utah, but they're all wilderness programs and they're all fucked up.
This video not only called out the modus operandi of the show, but also the treatment at Turnabout Ranch and the supposed therapy that they received there.
So for the first 3 days you're there is no showering. They put you in a circle, which is it's a teepee. It's a little teepee, but it's open, and you have to sit there for 3 days. They wouldn't let me lay down for nothing. Like, I was falling asleep and they were like, get up, get up. So I'm just sitting here like, this is gonna be really bad. When I seen these people have no sympathy, I was like, oh, I'm really doomed. They take away like necessity privileges, like sleeping on a bed, eating good food, not being cold, witnessing it. If you reported another kid like getting bullied by like their peers or something, they would just say, well, maybe that's what they need, or like something like that. Even though there was written rules, if a staff was angry at the moment, or if you just did something that they felt was bad, you would get your own punishment. Like, they would make up their own punishment for you. So it's really frustrating because even if you don't know the rules, if you fuck up, you're still in trouble. There's not no I didn't know. You're still in deep shit. They had no problem holding kids down.
Well, that part's life. You know what I mean? Even if you're not aware of the rules, you still get a little bit of trubbies, you know? Yeah, man, it's totally possible that this, like I said before, I think I said this one a bunch of times, it doesn't necessarily mean that Dr. Phil is at fault for everything necessarily. It's not a good thing. I don't see why Dr. Phil would apologize for that. Like, I mean, you know. And we also, again, we don't know how much of what she's saying is true or not. I mean, it's Danielle Bregoli. Like, you kind of have to take everything with a grain of salt. Doesn't mean that she's lying. It just also doesn't mean that she's telling the truth. It's good to take these things with a grain of salt and not just operate as if everything that she's saying is absolute. So,
which is against the law. You're not supposed to touch the kids, but they had no problem doing that. It's just our word against the staff's word when you're there, because there's no witnesses, there's no cameras, you don't have a phone, there's none of that. That's why I was always so scared to speak out, because it's like, no one's gonna believe me.
Now, this is of course a personal testimony. However, looking at the episodes of Brat Camp that I had archived, this all seemed very feasible. For some, of course, this would seem like appropriate disciplinary measures against an ill-mannered teen. However, this was also never really explained on Dr. Phil, and as a matter of fact, whenever discussing Turnabout Ranch, footage would always be shown of an activity more wholesome, such as horse riding.
Sure.
I doubt that was unintentional.
One morning I was cleaning up for breakfast, and one of the staff members was sitting right next to me, and she had her walkie on her, so I heard everything. One of the kids, he had tried to steal a car or something. Everyone was screaming on the walkies like it was really crazy, and he ended up killing one of the staff members. They made all the kids that were around him come down, and then they told us not to tell us anything. A day later, they have us all, every kid that's at Turnabout, they have us all sit in a circle, and they're like, listen, there was an incident, I know some of y'all heard it over the walkies, Jimmy died. And so we're all freaking out, because Jimmy was, like I said, he was one of them that was there the first day I got there. He was really sweet. Not only did Jimmy die, but one of the other staff members that was there at the time, Alicia, who was the daughter of the nurse. Alicia, she was injured, and 2 years later she died, and she was also left disabled after being attacked by Clay.
Bregoli's recounting of the Turnabout Ranch goes over many unnerving details, including that relating to the death of the staffer, and how that would understandably affect a young person residing there. However, there are more details she wanted to reveal.
So, a young lady, her name is Hannah, she recently spoke out because while she was there, she was sexually assaulted, and then when she reported that she was assaulted, she was punished by staff. Now, when I seen the punishment she was given, I knew like, okay, I really have to say something. Like, I really have to have her back on this, because I truly believe that they did that.
This claim covered the alleged violation of someone who was staying at the ranch at the same time, and how she was treated by personnel when she complained about it. It was clearly a matter that Bregoli took very seriously, and with this information it was easy to understand why she expected at the least an apology from the man himself. Would they receive it? Well, not really.
Well, I mean, yeah, but again, these things may be true. I wouldn't apologize if I was him either. I mean, You know, it's poorly intentioned. Well, I mean, maybe I would, but okay, let me rephrase that. from the perspective of, from a business perspective, an apology admits some kind of being complicit in some capacity and can lead to some kind of legal trouble. So I can see why he wouldn't apologize for it.
Around a week after the publication of the video, Dr. Phil made an appearance on Ashley Banfield's show, News Nation, to discuss this matter further. This was a pretty significant moment in the show's history, as Dr. Phil had very rarely taken to interviews to address situations which may question his character, outside the show at least. However, after a few minutes, you begin to see why.
Well, you know, she went to Turnabout 4 or 5 years ago, and she had a bad experience. You know, obviously, I would hate that. We'd be sorry about that, but we don't have anything to do with what happens with guests once they leave the stage. I mean, that's between the guardian and the parent and whatever facility they go to.
So he does say that he would be sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the answer I was expecting out of him. I mean, like, this more of like a professional, like, yeah, you know, it sucks, but, you know, it's a facility. I mean, you could definitely say that they shouldn't put their trust in that facility, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate. It's a shit situation, man. It's unfortunate.
Sorry, is she'd had a bad experience. I suppose that is
why do you think he had to know what was going on? Like, I don't know if you understand how the relationship would have worked. Why do you think that he has to know what's going on? Why do you think he has to know? I very highly doubt he knew it all. He would be so disconnected from this camp. Like, why would he, like, yeah, I know exactly what was happening. Why do you think that he knows that? He has nothing to do with it. I would very highly doubt he knows anything that's going on there, so... But okay, maybe.
A half apology, but I don't think there's that much question that she had a bad experience by the sound of it, regardless of whether what she's saying is 100% honest. I don't think we need any ifs at this point, if that's the threshold for an apology.
What else is there but some tough love, you know, at a ranch or where else? You can't coddle kids like that.
He also seems to distance himself from his own personal involvement in Turnabout Ranch. And okay, although I would say it's difficult to hold Dr. Phil personally responsible for the actions of another individual, this still isn't an honest reply. To be frank, the idea...
That's a legal reply. Yeah. So yeah, I guess you could argue it's not honest.
That they have absolutely no involvement is just preposterous. The countless promotional videos, the unrivaled, unquestioning praise, they all say far much more than McGraw can say in a single interview. Dr. Phil was extremely enthusiastic about the organizations that he worked with, even to the point of roasting parents who didn't agree. He could have acted shocked when confronted with this information, and it would have been more convincing than him saying they don't have anything to do with these places once they're out of Dr. Phil's care.
So we're not involved in that. We don't have any feedback from them. So whatever happens once they're there, that's between them and the facility. I assume she had a problem. She filed a complaint with the proper authorities or something 5 years ago. So I really don't know much about it.
Board. And we asked them for input. One of the top therapeutic residential programs on the globe.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, if that's what their accreditation had said, you know, if they got... If some kind of system was like, yeah, they're the top this, that, and the other thing on the globe, and of course he's going to repeat that, and he's going to believe that, you know, even if it's not true or it doesn't turn out to be true, for sure. Yeah, okay.
Tonight on an all-new episode, The Dangers of Dr. Phil.
That's funny though. Fuckers just stunned to death.
Legal. Edited by Landbob.
Oh my god, means so much dick here.
A few months after the video and the subsequent Dr. Phil interview, it was announced that the victim of the violation that Brogoli had spoken about, Hannah Archuleta, was initiating a lawsuit against Dr. Phil and their collaborating studios for the participation in sending children to Turnabout Ranch, while supposedly being aware of the many controversies that the center had been involved in since the early 2010s. We'll address the result of that in a bit, but it definitely posed the question of how ignorant Dr. Phil could be to the many problems that seemed evident to any onlooker, and these qualms would only be heightened as the industry looked more inward to address problems of workplace culture. 2020 was an interesting year for many reasons. However, as many viewers of this channel may recall, it was the year where the conduct of certain talk show hosts was brought into question, and their otherwise beloved reputation challenged. Probably the most notable example of this was...
Oh man, Ellen's fucking nuts. Does TRO have a video on Ellen? I'd love to see that kind of shit. Ellen's crazy, man. I still stand with Ellen, even if she does torture people worse than Al-Qaeda. You know what I mean? I mean, you know. Can't forget the classics like The Ellen Show.
Ellen, who many claim was an all-round unpleasant person to deal with, while the working conditions behind the scenes of her supposedly lovable show were comparable to that of an authoritarian regime. Needless to say, whether you believed in every story's verity or not, the effect it had on the show was evident, with ratings plummeting. And barely a couple years later, the Ellen DeGeneres Show was brought to an end after 19 seasons of mostly enjoyed success. The allegation certainly shook up the industry to say the least, and lifted the veil on the often hushed workplace culture that had seldom received scrutiny. For many, it was a bad experience, but up until then, many former employees had likely viewed it through the lens of any other job. The difference is when you're dealing with celebrities who preach the principles that aren't necessarily reflected in their private persona, there's a disingenuousness to their trade that makes you feel compelled to call them out. However, while this was new in many corners of the industry, arguably the tabloid talk shows should have been the most conscious of this. They've been long subject to criticism regarding maltreatment of those around them, especially given the often sensitive and revealing topics surrounding their guests. As a matter of fact, in 2016, Dr. Phil and his producers had already been sued by a former employee who had claimed they were falsely imprisoned during a meeting, when McGraw had locked the doors and threatened employees after information had leaked. The producers of Dr. Phil subsequently countersued, claiming that...
I mean, I wouldn't call that false imprisonment. I'm sure he was pissed. He locked the doors. I don't know if it's in prison. That seems like a little bit of exaggeratory language. That's usually how like the lawyer type of shit works. So false imprisonment, holy shit. Sure, maybe. I'd be pissed too. I don't know what leak that happened, you know. But if you're trying to keep it on the inside, there, I could see why he might get a little pissed off in general. You know, I mean, I get false imprisonment. I feel like that's such exaggerated language. Holy fuck. Maybe I'm just wrong.
This employee, who worked as a producer and director, had lifted footage from the production that infringed on the copyright, employment, and confidentiality rights of the show. In the end, the judge sided with the producers, and the potential for further publicity seemed to burn out. At first, it seemed that Dr. Phil had avoided the blast radius of the talk show apocalypse, but barely a few months before Ellen's final episode on February the 11th, 2022, 2 present and 10 former employees came forward to attest to a work environment that was anything but therapeutic. In many ways, the allegations against the Dr. Phil show followed a similar narrative to those that had sunk Ellen a couple years before. Although employees on the article did not directly witness McGraw berating or abusing employees, many of the producers acted tyrannically towards those working on the show, engaging in behavior that caused serious upset and discomfort. With how systemic and widespread the problem was in the workplace, many found it difficult to believe that an accomplished, observant psychologist and TV host would merely be ignorant to these incidents, with one being quoted as saying, "How can he not know?" Most of this centered in on a place called the control room, which employees described as a war zone, with yelling, insults, and all-round disrespect for employees who worked in those high-pressure conditions. The one public testimonial in this article comes from Tiffany Clark, who briefly did some work on behalf of Paramount. She said that during her short tenure, she was mercilessly berated by a supervisor who threatened jobs and openly bragged about making other employees quit. This information tells us a story endemic to many LA productions, and if you remove the names, you probably wouldn't be able to tell it from a show like Ellen. However, there was an aspect that set these claims apart from your usual studio hellhole. Now, as we noted, there are multiple testimonies that assert that the show subtly nudged guests towards problematic behavior that may be connected with the struggles they were encountering, nearly all of whom are from the guests themselves and their relatives. However, in this case, the employees appear to back up these claims, with multiple stories regarding the instruction they received when handling the show's participants. These included being encouraged to perpetuate racial stereotypes, not being properly equipped to deal with mentally vulnerable guests, and even one case where an employee claims they were directed to make sure a guest did not take their medication before going on stage.
Well, that sounds pretty fucked. The second one, though, I mean, how would they, I don't know, would they be able to be, I guess they have Dr. Phil, who should be able to advise them to be a little bit more capable of dealing with mentally ill or people with mental struggles, so sure.
Former members of staff also say they were advised to manipulate and befriend guests in an attempt to obtain bookings for the show, while profiling them on a variety of fronts. This is partially substantiated by an excerpt from an email that commends workers for convincing guests that they're trusted confidants, but reminding them to keep their distance, as said guests will likely throw them under the bus. Not the sort of sympathetic outlook on guests that you'd expect from Dr. Phil.
Well, I mean, if they're drug addicts and shit, like, it's possible. That one doesn't ring as particularly problematic to me, but okay. Like, what was that? Shit, let me do that. Let me just...
An email that commends workers for convincing guests that they're trusted confidants.
Okay, the less you share with the guests, the better. They are on a need-to-know basis. You all do a great job of convincing them you're friends. Just make sure you keep a firm line in the sand and say, not to say too much, or they will be the first ones to throw you under the bus. Trust me. Oh, this sounds like a reasonable warning. And actually good advice, generally speaking, in like a mental health environment. You're not really supposed to get too close to people that you're dealing with. You know, it's like a lack of being professional. It's reasonable advice. When word really gets on the show who would be interviewed by camera by McGraw, former employees say that they were encouraged to manipulate and convince them of whether they needed to hear in order to secure booking. Oh, okay. I guess they would lie to them to get them to get booked. We were specifically instructed to make sure that she doesn't take her medication before she goes on stage because they wanted her to look unstable and quote-unquote crazy, for lack of a better term. The employee said she did take the medication because no one got there in time. And I remember thinking, my God, I don't want to be the one to tell them or dissuade them of that. And that's all for TV. Obviously, this girl would be on her medication. That was we're trying. Okay, maybe. Might have been okay.
Reminding them to keep their distance, as said guests will likely throw them under the bus. Not the sort of sympathetic outlook on guests that you'd expect from Dr. Phil.
No, that seems pretty normal and professional. You know, like the other stuff, yeah, it's a bit of a red flag. That one seems perfectly reasonable. Okay.
By this time, such claims of workplace misconduct were becoming more and more pervasive, and for such an environment, maybe that wasn't surprising. It seems to be a deeply ingrained cultural issue. However, the one aspect that should always be prioritized in this sort of show is the safety of guests, who genuinely need help above anything else, something that Dr. Phil has always publicly preached. This didn't appear to be a cultural misstep, this seemed to be intentional, and for that there were much more serious ramifications. As always, it's important to present both sides, and as many other stories reported, the team behind Dr. Phil did respond, firstly denying any of the allegations regarding treatment of staff and guests, while also referring their own members of staff to the publication in support of their perspective. Their angle was that yes, filming of a show like Dr. Phil could be intense, especially considering the unpredictability of those involved. However, nobody has been abused, nobody has been treated unfairly, and nobody was subjected to any forms of profiling or stereotyping under the watch of a show's executive. We can't support one experience unquestionably without taking into account the other experiences, and obviously the producers offered individuals who contradicted the accusatory testimonies written in the article. However, the report definitely outlined a continuing narrative on the Dr. Phil show, one that it was struggling to shake off. This isn't the first time that such claims have been made, and although an intensive workshop may create disgruntled employees, it's hardly a complete explanation for the often corroborating stories from supposedly separate sources. All I'd say is that in this case, it's hard to blame people for believing what was being said with the information available, whereas in the past, the Dr. Phil show had cast doubt on the guests and their families by pointing to the possibility of ulterior motives and the fact that certain memories may be corrupted. That didn't really apply here. To be frank, there wasn't a copious amount of new evidence being presented, but these claims were substantiated by what was already publicly available to viewers, and only added an additional layer of credibility to the criticisms being leveled against the Dr. Phil crew. But could it tell us anything about the man himself?
I like that song. It's pretty based.
Other than the lawsuit in 2016, we didn't really have much evidence that supported this idea that Dr. Phil was an outwardly unpleasant person to those around him. And to be fair, you can't control everything your employees say or do. However, many would argue that he had presented himself as a hands-on person who cared about making a difference in these people's lives. And this seemed to contradict that. Now, with everything considered, the show still hasn't picked up too much flack. I think mainly because controversy comes with the territory, and such TV shows are never going to be completely unproblematic. Where someone like Ellen was meant to represent an environment where people could just be unbridled in their joy, Dr. Phil thrives on the energy of the guests as well, many of whom bring their own, sometimes less than positive spirit to the stage. That chaos seemed more inbuilt with that structure, which unfortunately makes such workplace misconduct stand out less. It's not a surprise that the Dr. Phil machine has mostly persisted, rather unscathed from the troubles of the past few years. However, this hasn't stopped people from asking questions, and I think as skepticism of this form of therapy content in general rises, then people are likely to revisit these claims, and time won't necessarily nullify them. When put together in one place, they do tell a damning story, and one that doesn't present the most flattering image of one of TV's most famous therapists. Creating compelling television is always a struggle, because a lot of people want to see what they often can't see in their own lives. Therapy is one of those things that is personal. It's between two private individuals, and obviously for many in the psychological field, that confidentiality is part of the process.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, that's of course going to be something criticized for Dr. Phil, because it is not the best environment for this stuff. But to an extent, you kind of know a little bit what you're getting into. I mean, if you want actual professional help, get an actual professional. I know a hot take. But yeah, I mean, like he had said before, you're not exactly encouraged to, you're not exactly in a good space to be able to be as honest as you may want to be, or as vulnerable as you may want to be, because you're not in a judgment-free zone. That's what a therapy is supposed to be. You're certainly not in a judgment-free zone. You're in a very judgmented zone, right? That's how people are going to treat it. So...
It's where you can talk about your deepest, darkest thoughts with the hope of eventually expelling them. It's hard to do something publicly where many would argue that privacy is part of its necessity. After all, as people like Danielle Bregoli show, when cameras and audience members are viewing you, you're conditioned to behave differently. However, I also think there is value in people being open about their struggles, and there being a medium to connect with that over. There may not be a right way to do this, but there is a best way to do this. By 2022, I think the critics had lost faith that this was the best way, or that it was even a worthwhile route. Whether it was Dr. Phil's individual will or not, there were clearly conflicts of interest between driving the vehicle that creates entertaining TV and actually protecting the well-being of vulnerable guests. Even discounting the allegations, many of the clips spoke for themselves.
Todd, Dr. Phil.
Hi, I'm Todd. Nice to meet you.
How you feel, man? Can you walk?
Barely. I have to have help.
All right.
Sorry, I'm very...
Although you could certainly attribute certain blame to individuals, I think there was also a great question looming over the show that McGraw operated, particularly regarding its methodology. The prioritization of tell-all television is something that's always been valued in the industry. However, I think there were new elements that Dr. Phil introduced which made that pursuit more dangerous for people who may find themselves in a vulnerable place. In a way, what the Dr. Phil show promoted as its greatest facets were also its greatest problems. We return to this point of help, the one that McGraw helped set the program apart with by collaborating with all these centers and clinics. To me, it seems that the Dr. Phil showrunners either didn't realize the level of heightened responsibility that rested on their shoulders or were aware and simply did not care. One allegation in particular comes to mind, that made by the mother who had to visit Skid Row with her daughter, that she'd been told that if she wanted her daughter to receive treatment that they were offering, she would have to cooperate with the narrative being spun on stage. I feel it's a believable scenario.
I mean, again, I just don't think that's the most, I don't think that's the most accurate representation. I mean, we're talking, bro, are you seriously, is this a PvP? Oh, it's a PvP one. Bro, not for nothing. But I mean, you really have to, bro. We're talking about like an enabling mother, who is not exactly the best. I'm fucking sticking to that argument. And you're trying to make it seem like they did such a horrible thing. She literally is a mother who took her kid out of. She took her kid out of the hospital so that she could, bro. She took her kid out of the hospital to get drugs, and we're gonna sit here and like pretend that this woman is innocent in any capacity. I don't believe her framing at all on any of the shit that's happening at all. So, because holy fuck, what a bad mom, bro.
But even if the details weren't exactly so, I do think it underlines the extremely sensitive power dynamic that is present during the show. On one hand, the notion of receiving help is a good idea that hasn't been nearly present in enough of these shows. However, as the only party that can provide that help in these scenarios, there's also an invisible dependence that is experienced by many of the guests. They're relying on the show to offer that help, but that help is chosen by the show and can be withdrawn at any time, as Dr. Phil explained himself.
One thing I knew for
sure, so don't use the show for help. I mean, you know, I don't know what to tell you. Don't use the show for help, and then you won't really have this problem. Sure, there could definitely be a power dynamic, but I feel like a lot of this anti-Dr. Phil hype is overblown.
For sure is that these girls were not ready to be home because home wasn't ready for these girls. I told you that, I was clear about it, and then you say, well, I've actually talked to some other experts, then you need to do what they want you to do. Best of luck to you, but I'm not going to support that.
Who wouldn't want to cooperate with Dr. Phil's narratives in these cases, particularly when a person...
I mean, yeah. So Dr. Phil saying, I'm looking at this. It sounds like there's an enabling, like an enabling household, right? There's some kind of an enabling household, and yeah, I mean, that's it. And he's like, this is how I think that we should handle it. And the guy's like, well, I talked to a professional, and they say I should do this. And he's like, okay, so go do that, but you have to listen, but I'm not going to support you in that. Why would he say anything else? That makes perfect sense, of course.
And your relationship with them are at stake. And these people are their friends, their family. Fleeting public dignity is a small price to pay to help your struggling relative to survive. Dr. Phil said that he wasn't involved in the actual treatment after his show, and that statement's falsehood is borderline self-explanatory. If that statement was true, then this dynamic would never have existed, as the help offered would be independent of whatever Dr. Phil says on his show.
Well, his point that he's making is that like he's not like liable for it. He helps people get help, and then he's hands off. It makes sense. I mean, I get what he's saying. It's also like he's making like a legal argument too.
So. Instead, they're intertwined. The behavior exhibited on Dr. Phil's show directly influences the treatment that these individuals receive. Their actions on air dictates Dr. Phil's recommendations, despite the many extraneous variables that can influence their deportment during these episodes. Many of these people's progress continues to be covered and critiqued in front of the cameras, even in these clinics and therapy centers. It's part of the show. And if that's the choice of the show, then so be it. But you have to acknowledge that it's a flawed system that can yield some complications, and that it is an effect of the show you operate, regardless of whether you wish to admit it.
But if we're going to do this, we're going to do this my way.
So even if that help was flawed, many didn't want to decry it or criticize it because it could influence how they received that help. Dr. Phil's seal of approval propelled a lot of these places into the spotlight, and even if someone had a negative experience with such a place, they may hesitate to speak up if they still had loved ones involved in the treatment. And who would dare question the moral authority of someone as revered as Dr. Phil McGraw?
It's also possible most of the people there had a positive experience, and then there's a very small limited number of people who had a negative experience. I mean, like, we're playing if we're going to play the argument that like, oh, there's people who might be under some kind of like, they may not want to be honest. They might be too scared to speak up. Maybe they're also getting really good help. I mean, and they don't want to speak up because they don't agree with it. Like, that's, both these things are perfectly possible. You know,
all this in mind, it just makes this.
All I'm saying is we should keep in mind that like some of these people that are going on the show want to be famous more than they want help. What the fuck? There's 4 paladins in this group. Holy shit. So
response even worse.
We don't have anything to do
with what happens with guests once they leave the stage.
If there is any shred of truth in what he said, it means that he had no investment or interest in the quality of care provided by a lot of these places that he rode so hard for in his shows. And these weren't...
Well, no, it also might just mean that, like, there's a center that's reputable, and he's very hands-off at that point, and he's not going to actively support it anymore after they found some of this stuff out. But, like, you know, again, you can't really admit some kind of a fault, because that could get you in a little bit of trouble there, you know? I mean, maybe your argument's like, hey, I don't like the legal response argument. Okay, fair enough. I get it. Like, you know, lawyers are scumbags, yada, yada. I totally understand that, but...
simple sponsorships that people could go to if they wanted to. These are the places that were offered specifically, and with all this in mind, it becomes hard to buy that Dr. Phil had no knowledge whatsoever of the incidents that occurred at many of these places. In a way, his response distances himself far too much to the point where it just was not believable, and a more straightforward theory seemed to emerge, which shone a much darker light onto the show and how it had been operated.
Let's get some real allegations in here, in the building.
Amongst a quagmire of other shows in the genre that regularly sought to put guests on the spot regarding private affairs, indiscretions, and matters that only really served as entertainment for the baying crowds, Dr. Phil stood out to many, a beacon in how topics could be tackled on television. Thanks to his skills, McGraw was often able to navigate topics and address guests in ways that appeared fair and astute.
The pursuit of perfection is in and of itself a flawed pursuit because there is no perfection. You know that. Nothing can ever get straight enough, perfect enough, clean enough, right enough. Because if it is, you've got to go back and check it, right?
It didn't just make him popular with audiences who felt his approach represented a more humanized perspective of guests, but also with studios who were often learning the hard way that such formulas could lead to disaster. There's been no large-scale disaster on The Dr. Phil Show, nothing that has defined the legacy of the show, and as the ratings of competitors dropped, McGraw's ship remained stable. The lack of emotional provocation directly from Dr. Phil often meant that people really couldn't do much with actual legal complaints. Whatever happened couldn't directly be linked back to an appearance on Dr. Phil. It's not illegal to have guests, after all. There has to be some level of personal responsibility, something that Dr. Phil has always preached. In a lot of tabloid talk shows, their format enabled responsibility for any misconduct to be assigned to the producers and the host, because of their language and behavior that may have affected the actions of these guests. Not just on the show, but subsequently after the show. The public crucifixion many people were often subject to was life-ruining, a fate I wouldn't wish on nearly anyone. And when these consequences became apparent, I think a lot of people realized TV needed to change. Dr. Phil seemed above that, though. His show seemed to occupy this very neutral sphere where they merely provided a platform for these discussions and interventions to occur. Whatever happened otherwise was ultimately the result of decisions made by individuals. This reputation was bolstered by Dr. Phil's image and background, which often applauded him as a professional voice whose words were rooted in scientific observation. Although acknowledging that he was not a medical doctor or even a practicing psychologist, McGraw still leaned into this image, with many products, shows, and public appearances that promoted him as a credible voice within the sphere. All of this established him as a neutral, mild TV personality who merely wanted to teach people some common sense, and his self-titled show followed that formula. This perspective was reflected in Dr. Phil's response to Danielle Bregoli. All he does on the show is sit there and make observations and recommend the support a person should receive. The observational approach prides itself on attempting to dissect these subjects from a factual basis and in a way that allows individuals to present themselves in their unfiltered, unprovoked form. Now, in principle, it was questionable whether such a format could ever be truly neutral. The involvement of an audience, TV cameras, sure, on paper they're not directly accountable to a studio, but they still influence outcomes of possible interventions and discussions that would regularly refer to intimate and revealing details broadcast out there for eternity. Yet you could defend the show on the basis that there has to be some public exposure for it to constitute a show at all. Nevertheless, there are definitely...
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, it's not going to be perfect. I think we said that like 100 times already. Because of course, did we rewind the video on accident? Like, I don't understand. Yeah, of course, it's not going to be perfect. It's still a TV show. I mean, it's just like, do they abuse their stance as a TV show? I don't think that they do. I don't think you showed anything that suggests that in any real capacity. If anything, I feel like now the fucking hype against Dr. Phil is just like terminally online bullshit, where people are just like over sensationalizing things again for content. That's what it feels like. See that all the time on fucking things, and then the narrative just runs away with it, and like we're just all there. It's like, yeah, Dr. Phil's bad, and like, why? Because somebody said so. It's like, okay, he's abusive. It's like, what situation you talking about? I don't really remember. You know, it's kind of where we get to a little bit there, kind of what it feels like to an extent, but.
Certain hoops they'd have to jump through to retain this defense, which is what some began to question. First, you have that dynamic of dependence between the guests and the showrunners, that unspoken assumed debt, one that could very easily dictate personal behavior and commentary on it. However, deeper than that, we have the actual alleged conduct undertaken by people working behind the scenes that seem to challenge their guests and their own personal responsibility for their demons. As it's been preached, personal responsibility was extremely important, and as far as we know, the crew of Dr. Phil never forced any guest's hand in their actions. However, on multiple occasions, the Dr. Phil show appeared to be more orchestrated than those behind it were prepared to admit. Their behavior in attempting to make TV more engaging seemed to amount to nudging certain guests towards detrimental actions, not safeguarding vulnerable individuals properly, and prioritizing their business deals and spicy stories over the actual well-being and autonomy of some of those who they covered. Each allegation seemed to tell the same story, that although there seemed to be no active sabotage conducted by producers, they pushed the responsibility of difficult decisions onto distressed guests it to generate conflict, which would then be touched on by the surly host, who would hold them accountable.
I have no excuse. I didn't want her to withdraw. I know that we did try and take her to the hospital, and she ended up leaving. I don't have an answer for why I did what I did. I just wanted to help her feel better.
So you got the heroin, right? How did you take it?
Injected it.
So you bought heroin that she pumped into her veins and therefore into the baby's veins. Yes. So that baby is high on heroin.
It's a very curious connection between...
Yeah, I don't know. I still don't really understand. Like, you seem to think that this is a dunk on Dr. Phil. It's simply not. I don't know. You keep bringing it up as if he acted irresponsibly here. You keep pushing this idea. It's like, well, you have to listen to that. But, bro, this is a woman who brought her daughter to a fucking drug deal because she thought, a nurse thought, you know what's really good for addicts? Put them back on the drugs. I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh yeah, of course, right? Like, come on, we're good. We gotta like it. Where did we get to the point where we're like, something's not right here? Like, that mom's an enabler. It's probably one of the reasons why her kid's a drug addict.
In many of the stories, this is not one that people would necessarily consciously concoct to be consistent with other claims, but they suggested that the Dr. Phil producers indulged a sweet spot between the show's responsibility and the guest responsibility. Sure, they didn't necessarily make these guest decisions for them, but they put them in a position where many of them felt like they had no other option, whether that's due to the unspoken dynamic or the outwardly spoken words. Even if it seems like they have a choice.
I mean, they're making it seem like he fucking cornered them. These are the decisions like, hey, this is the rehab facility you should go to that I'm paying for. Because I, as Dr. Phil, want to try to use a place that I feel is reputable. Now, is there an issue with that place? Maybe. There may be an issue with their reputability, but like, they're generally accredited to it. So it's reasonable to think that Dr. Phil thought that they were like a decent place and they were decently accredited. And he just happened to be wrong. You know, people get stuff wrong. It's unfortunate. But that doesn't mean that he's like a fucking scumbag piece of shit, you know?
It's almost its own illusion. The presence of an audience makes this even more difficult because given almost all of them are likely to be in favor of Dr. Phil, try to send and you're arguing against 100 more people who have complete free reign to vocalize those feelings. It's not hard to tell which side they're going to take. We know the central narrative of a show like this will always aim to present Dr. Phil lifting people out of a struggle. He has to be their savior, but they shouldn't have to manipulate scenarios to ensure that a person has a struggle to be lifted out of. As their PR guru once said, those people were already encountering difficulties at the time that they arrived. What happens to the show may not have too much of a direct bearing on those specific issues, yet just because someone is suffering from a problem doesn't mean that an appearance on public television is just like any other Tuesday when addressing it. That sort of show can be a make or break situation for a person's well-being. You see, whereas Greenberg's statement was used to defer responsibility, many would use it to bestow greater responsibility. Just because someone is fighting their own personal battle doesn't mean you can't provide some reinforcements here or there, and you have to make the best TV out of it. Although they had established a prestige amongst many viewers as the show that provided the most sincere platform for people to share their struggles, their setup enabled a bulletproof formula that would yield the results they wanted, reaping the credit for everything that went right without making them too responsible for the things that went wrong, exploiting nearly every medium possible to maximize their own success. But in spite of it...
What an uncharitable perspective, bro. It's not easy to get people like out of addictions or help them with the mental health issues. There's only so much you can really do. Even in like a highly like well-facilitated situation, it's difficult for these things. Like I just feel like the way that he's talking about it is like a little disconnected from reality, man.
Its continued success are the curtains finally coming down on this iconic daytime show.
I don't think anything's gonna happen because this is a kind of a sensationalized video, but Dr. Phil's really tall. Nice.
The year is 2022. And Dr. Phil has been up and running for 20 seasons. It has outlasted nearly every tabloid talk show, a majority of normal talk shows, including Oprah, and still pulls significant viewership. He must have done something right. Well, in many ways, Dr. Phil achieved a feat unrivaled by nearly every other daytime show.
It's also unfortunate that we're like hyper focusing on all like the bad things that he's done, and we're not really like, you're like, yeah, look, you've cherry picked like 3 scenarios out of 20 years of television. And you're like, oh yeah, he did a real bad thing. It's like, well, it sounds like maybe he did it, you know? Maybe he was excellent at his job, and like, you know what I mean? Like, maybe he did a really good job. I don't know, you know?
Show. Regardless of when or how it ends, it will have irrevocably changed many people's lives, for better and sometimes for worse. McGraw has influenced multiple generations of people on how they may approach the topics of mental health and many other sensitive subjects surrounding the matter, which is probably why people find the show such a hotbed for modern-day discussion. It's influenced how people seek help, put a face on a lot of unknown conditions, and platformed important discussions that were often considered too taboo for mainstream television.
I just want it to stop. I want to be able to get along with him. I do love him with my whole heart.
Then he needs to be worthy of that. And treating you with dignity and respect is an entry-level beginning.
There's no doubt that many of those subjects covered by Dr. Phil will remain relevant for decades to come, but will the man himself be at the forefront of it? With all that's been discussed today, I'm not entirely sure. Dr. Phil's venture into the online community definitely gave him and the show a second wind that very few could have probably predicted. It made him relevant with a new audience and refreshed him in the memory of old ones. However, success in the online world does come with the acknowledgement that you don't always have the control of public perception that you might have on other mediums. It didn't help.
Like, did I rewind the fucking video? I feel like he said this like 6 times. I'm not even kidding. Did I rewind the video? Like, we're at 2 hours. I feel like I haven't rewound it at all on accident. Because he keeps saying the same. I know I do the same thing, but he keeps saying the same thing over and over and over again.
That at its core, Dr. Phil was still old-school syndicated television. They didn't really adjust their rules depending on who was watching or talking about them. Certain pursuits that became quite easy to criticize were picked up on, and even though it was likely fairly standard procedure when the show was launched, by this time people clearly realized there had to be somewhat more rigorous moral standards with the content he was producing. And when he eventually got involved in the pinnacle of what every online figure dreads, drama, his response was clearly taken from the TV template of admitting nothing. The only problem was that it just wasn't believable at all. In 2018, owing to its continued success, Dr. Phil was renewed for an additional 4 seasons running up until May 2023. This was quite the feat, all things considered. However, in the last couple years, it has lost its syndicated crown to other shows, including Live with Kelly and Ryan and The View. Now, this isn't to say the ratings still haven't been strong. Dr. Phil still pulls...
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, he's not going to maintain, like, #1 relevancy forever, of course. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. The issue is if he decided to start sacrificing his platform just to maintain relevancy, which doesn't seem to be displayed, so...
significant viewership, all things considered. Whereas in March 2020, he was pulling a Nielsen rating of 2.8, by the end of 2021, that had dropped to 1.4, and it seems somewhat uncertain if there will be a further extension to the show's lifespan. On the basis of the numbers alone, I'd say they have reason to renew. However, on the basis of the trend, I'd say they're probably aware of the risk. In August 2022, for the start of season 21, they laid off 25 staffers in a move to cut costs, and although the studio downplayed the move, it's hard to ignore such significant downsizing, especially given the stories that had come out over the year before. The only real piece of good news for the show came from the result of the lawsuit regarding Turnabout Ranch, which judge dismissed as ultimately not having strong enough grounds to pursue. Having probably the most TV company move of them all, the response of the Dr. Phil show was to request the court to have the former guest, Archuleta, pay them $400,000 in legal fees, which seems just a bit...
Well, yeah, of course they are. If they feel it's a false allegation, then why wouldn't they counter with, like, hey, they should pay us back for something because they tried to tarnish our reputation? Of course it's going to be there. Like, let's just keep that in mind. Like, if they are innocent and this person's guilty, by this logic, why wouldn't they push back and say, I want my money back? Right?
Tasteless considering the sensitivity of the case and the fact that a separate lawsuit against Turnabout Ranch has yet to be concluded. But that's just my take. I could point towards one specific story and say that it was the straw that broke the camel's back.
In fact, it would be even more suspicious if they didn't do that, right?
Really, I think it's just a result of gradual attrition, a formula being worn to the bone, and people finally realizing it wasn't the TV that it claimed to be. I think that back in the day, when it was competing with shows that regularly skewered their guests and made the grandest spectacle of each situation, Dr. Phil could be that more humane alternative. With the rise of the internet and Dr. Phil's own participation in it, they found themselves out of step with more refined documentaries and psychological analyses of situations by accredited experts who treat these topics with much more reverence than Dr. Phil ever did. McGraw's show still has the edge in the fact that it often directly involves these subjects and the fact that they can actually offer treatment and coverage of such. But that has been overshadowed by the questions surrounding a lot of these treatment centers and Dr. Phil's own relationship with them. YouTubers who worked with counseling site BetterHelp came under criticism after the company found themselves mired in controversy regarding the status of some professionals, and some creators were thought to have not actually used the site they were promoting. That is a drop in the ocean compared to what McGraw has appeared to greenlight. The lawsuit regarding Turnabout Ranch has also further torn a hole in that previously impenetrable reputation. Although lawsuits were not necessarily anything new to Dr. Phil, and certainly this result wasn't, the media coverage, the names attached, and the possible precedent that could have been set if they had found McGraw and his crew culpable for their recommendation is enough to give many studios cold feet. This probably wouldn't have even been conceivable when the show started up in the early 2000s, with TV the medium and guests making 1 or 2 appearances before being forgotten in the run of episodes. With the online world immortalizing much of this content, mostly at the behest of Dr. Phil's production team, their strength of reaching a new audience is also that vulnerability. Like a lot of TV shows and even media in general, Dr. Phil was ahead of its time when it made its debut, but has fallen behind the evolving zeitgeist as the years have passed, and it seems too resistant to the change it would need to undertake to overcome that. Maybe Phil's format just wasn't capable of something more human, or maybe it was, but wasn't prepared to make that change.
I believe I can bring him really quality help, and I think he can respond to that, and I think he probably will.
In principle, I don't think it would be completely impossible to overhaul the current system in place. However, I think the issue is that when a show becomes so established over a long period of time, it digs its roots in, which makes it very difficult for certain changes to be effected. The additional problem is that your remaining audience may only be comfortable with your current format, so even if your numbers are down currently, you still risk distancing the loyal viewers by completely renovating the show that so many of those viewers have come to appreciate. But is it radical to ask?
Also, now we're kind of like leaning into this idea that like Dr. Phil's not going to change his ways because he has audience capture, which I mean is possibly true, but it just comes off as so malicious the way that like he makes it seem like. I mean, if anything, it's like, yeah, this formula is working. Why would he change? You're asserting that there's some level of abuse here, but like just because you're making the assertion doesn't necessarily mean you're correct, right? So why would he make this change because the right opinion said so? I don't know, man. It just kind of comes off as like, again, like a little fucking disconnected.
For a bit more humanity. Arguably, much of what we discuss today wouldn't necessarily require that many adjustments, just a heightened sensitivity and improved safeguarding.
Okay, so how do you know they haven't changed? Like, just because they're not being explicit about it. Like, let's say that you're right about some of these situations. Maybe they've identified it and they've decided to make a change. They're just not saying, guys, we're going to make a change. They're not announcing it like the people do on YouTube every time they make a mistake, which is very bizarre behavior to constantly be like, guys, I made a mistake. We don't do that in our day-to-day lives. It's weird for you to constantly like hyper-focus and fixate on like every single time you make a mistake. That's like, if we did that in our real world, in our real lives, we would be fucking, we go insane. It's impossible, right? So maybe that's why.
However, even that may be a bit too much for a show that at its core still thrived on the drama that it superficially seemed to seek distance from. And to be brutally honest, maybe that's what people wanted. We discussed in the past with the Ellen video, one of the aspects of a modern talk show that appeals to so many people is this thought that what you're receiving is an unfiltered, authentic version of a person. Unfortunately, Hollywood ruins most things, and for studios it often seems easier to manufacture the illusion of an authentic atmosphere than to actually craft one organically. Yet if people are none the wiser to this assembly, then who can it harm? Well, in principle, it doesn't have to harm anyone if it's managed correctly. The problem is that a formula based on deception doesn't tend to attract the most sincere characters, and when you're dealing with topics like mental health, there tends to be more at stake. You can't blame audiences for only seeing what they want to see, because in truth they often only see what the TV producers want to see. But anything catered to being more realistic would probably undermine the studio's version of how authentic such TV shows should appear. Every show has an angle because it's what sells. Dr. Phil was often presented as a selfless endeavor, an altruistic drive to help people beat their demons and get their lives back on track. Finally, a format for a show based around the needs of a guest. However, I think over time it became clear to audiences that it wasn't exactly about helping. It was more about people believing you're helping.
I don't think most people would agree with that assertion. People who watch probably don't agree with you at all. It's weird that you, I don't know, like, yeah, this is what people think. This is what people online think. I think we have to kind of, if we're going to talk about the audience capture from Dr. Phil, let's talk about the audience capture from The Right Opinion. Potentially just kind of leaning into what the public thinks, has a perception of Dr. Phil, because you can't have, like, really an opinion outside of that otherwise. That's the same audience capture issue. Back, forth, left, right, and fucking sideways, brother,
We've already addressed how cameras affect the guests on the show, but the cameras also affect Dr. Phil. And when they were rolling, people received a seemingly measured and earnest persona, but a persona nonetheless. This was a one-man franchise. Anything that threatened that image was quickly
Sure, but that's like, that's basically, to an extent, I guess you call it code switching. We're all different based on who we're talking to. Of course he's going to be a little bit different. Doesn't mean that it's, just because he's different, like, you're different in real life than you are on this camera too. Now, you have to, it's not that the difference is irrelevant. It's like whether that difference is disingenuous in some capacity. He might come off as more professional because he's talking in a more public, professional setting. Doesn't make him like instantaneously like this fucking bad guy. It's really weird that you keep asserting as such. Okay.
Dispatched on.
Good morning to you, Ty.
Hey, bump fights, baby.
Is that a wig you're wearing?
No, real hair.
Real hair. Just curious, because I understand you're not using your real name, and I wonder why that is.
Well, no, Ty Beeston is my real name. I'm a film student out of USC, and it took 3 years to put together the footage for the bump fights, and now it's out.
And now the police come calling.
Well, I'm not worried about it. I don't think I've done anything wrong.
It's been a long video, but I do have one more story for you. Yes, an incident that has acquired internet fame allegedly involving the creator of bum fights, Ty Beeston, is often pointed to by critics as a perfect example of what we're discussing today.
Now, I have to warn you, some of this footage that you're about to see is clearly inappropriate for young viewers. Please ask your children to leave the room. And I'm serious, you really don't want your kids watching this, and it's not going to be fun for you to see it. But we have to be aware of what's floating around out there and what our kids have access to.
Bum Fights is a rather grim series of films designed to exploit homeless people by making them participate in often quite dangerous antics, and so it made sense that they would be subject to criticism from someone like McGraw, who would obviously find such content abhorrent on the grounds of its inhumanity. Okay. This seemed like the perfect opportunity to pick someone apart for their actions. And yet...
I've made multi-millions off the Bum Fights video series. I'm not surprised at my success. It's a sick world.
Stop the tape. Stop the tape. I don't want to talk to you.
Why not?
That's despicable. I don't want to talk to you. You can go. I just watched that footage, and that is absolutely despicable, and I refuse to publicize that.
In the moment, it seemed that McGraw, so roused by the content he watched, had made an active decision to not indulge this heartless troll.
Yeah, okay. There's nothing wrong with that. What's the issue?
Harrowing moment of principle from the doctor himself. He credits this stance as it's a matter that is clearly very personal to him, as he said he has been homeless too. Yet, he's interviewed worse people, hasn't he? I mean, what is so exceptional about this guy?
If you think I exploit people, every time you bring a guest on this show, you exploit them and spread whatever problems they have to the whole world. You think that's helping them?
Yeah, keep telling yourself that. You can go.
Well, you see, he's dressed in rather interesting.
So, like, this is the problem with this video personified, right? This is the problem I have with the Right Opinions video here. Just personified. I mean, like, yeah, he's a good content creator, by the way. It's just to establish that. Okay, so we had a guy come on who was doing bump fighting, and Dr. Phil was so frustrated by it that he's like, I'm not even going to bother talking to you. Now, we could argue whether that was a performative moment, or whether, you know, like Dr. Phil in the moment was just like, no, this is too fucked up. I'm not going to give this guy the time of day. Right? But then the Right Opinion is like, yeah, well, he's talked to worse people right after acknowledging that apparently Dr. Phil's been homeless. So this hits home for him. You're crafting this really bizarre narrative about his motivations while giving us like the actual information. Like, yeah, that makes sense. If he's personally connected to this, yeah, maybe he just didn't want to talk about it because he's been personally there before and he just can't. There's nothing wrong with him not wanting to use his platform to promote this person. I don't really see the problem, but it's really bizarre that you're trying to pretend there's one. It's fucking super disconnected from reality, man. Like, it's fucking weird as hell. I was just told him not dead. Fuck. I gotta rotate. So
in a tie, you could go as far to say him and Dr. Phil have practically matching suits. As that clip just illustrated, it wasn't done without purpose. As a matter of fact, it seems Beeson wanted to take the opportunity to make a "you and I ain't so different" type speech. Now, I would say that Bump Fights is somewhat worse than Dr. Phil on the basis of its premise, and I think McGraw could have made that case for himself. But clearly anticipating that it's an argument he does not want to have, he pulls the plug on the interview. Now, this isn't exactly an admission that Beeson is in fact correct, but for a man who's so sure-footed on the narratives he propounds and the judgments he makes on other people, you'd think he'd be at least able to stand up for himself. And yet he can't even answer as the creator of one of the most philistine forms of modern media. If it truly was a matter that caused McGraw to feel so strongly to the point where he didn't want to give this guy the time of day, he shouldn't have let him on the show in the first place.
Sure, maybe it's performative, but also maybe he just had him on the show and said, you know, fuck this. I don't know.
Missing the guy when he was actively there before he could even say anything was probably the most cowardly thing to do. Phil saw this guy coming and realized it wasn't going to be your usual dunking. If it was truly about the people that Dr. Phil sought to help or address, he would have no reservations going toe-to-toe with some of the most questionable figures in modern culture, like a lot of the old talk show hosts from the 60s. But it's always a question of control for McGraw, and they can't afford an episode which even makes him look remotely out of his depth. There has to be a predictability about how these guests are going to behave so that McGraw can assert control over the situation. So that if they concur with him, they're engaging positive.
Where we go with this control narrative? It came out of nowhere. We're talking about this guy that like has homeless fights and he thinks he's a piece of shit. Where the fuck are we're really running with this? Like the fucking moon, dude.
With his narrative, or if they are so bold to try and detract from them, the show has a way to discredit what they say, whether they're young, intoxicated, or just mentally unstable. The last part, I requested more humanity, but humanity is a two-way street, and to require more humanity from the show would require more humanity from Dr. Phil. And I think it's just too much to ask from a show that has prided itself on having a superhuman host. After all, he's just a little sensitive.
It's the love story of the century, but you've never physically met.
No, sir. And y'all can laugh at me. Fine. I will be your spectacle. I will be your laughing spectacle. You can all laugh at me. It's
well,
fine.
You know what? I think we're just going to shut this down because I'm not into all this melodrama and you playing the victim and everything. So you're saying the audience is making a spectacle out of you. That's not what I'm about. That's not what I do. I had you.
Hey, fucking base, dude.
Come here to help you. And you're saying people are ridiculed, making fun of you. You're going to be a spectacle. I don't want to be any part of that.
I used the word Messiah earlier, and I 100% meant it. Dr. Phil's show is structured off making the title character seem like that savior at any and all costs, that he is right.
I mean, I don't know the context of that situation. He sounds pretty fucking base to me. So I don't give a shit on that one. What is it that we're trying to communicate here? Like, what's the problem with what he was saying there? Understanding, you know, like...
But the truth is that nobody, not even a therapist, can fulfill that image, and any show that provides that impression is not being honest with its guests or its audience. Problem is that when you successfully sell that image, not only are you selling an unrealistic expectation of therapy to millions of people, you aren't creating a fair environment for a struggling guest to actually find the support they need. It means that any actual treatment doesn't have to be catered to the individual, more to a show's agenda, and if it doesn't work, you can push responsibility onto the guest for not being receptive enough. It's the Seymour Skinner complex of asking whether your form of therapy didn't work and then concluding that it must be the patient who's wrong. It's built off this idea purported to audiences that it's Dr. Phil offering a service to these people, when in reality, it's quite the opposite.
This has just gone in a really bad direction. I'm going to talk with Jasmine. I'm going to talk with your mother, and I'm just going to let you head on home and go because I'm not going to play.
Is there anything I can say to fix this? I'm so sorry.
No, all of this melodrama about ridiculing the audience and they can laugh at you and all that. I don't play those kind of games. You're very manipulative, and I'm not interested in all of that.
Although
did I rewind this, or did you just decide to play that twice? Because that clip is based as fuck. I don't know.
There would be no show without cameras and no narrative without the producers. There would be no Dr. Phil without the guests. They provide the show with years of timeless stories and harrowing accounts, receiving very little from it in return. Their benefit, the hope for recovery, which really should be provided regardless of financial incentive, is the least they deserve. And I
mean, that's a system issue. Wait, what?
Sometimes a show with years of timeless stories and harrowing accounts, receiving very little from it in return. Their benefit, the hope for recovery, which really should be provided regardless of financial incentive, is the least they deserve. And
okay, that's a system issue. Maybe we should focus on the system. You don't want to fucking go after Dr. Phil for not like having some kind of universal health care. Like, I don't understand. I mean, like, you know, if you want to talk about maybe there's an issue of like a performative act of kindness, but I don't really, I mean, it seems like he actually cares. And he's trying to help these people, and like if you have a problem with people not getting help that they need, then have a problem with the fact that we don't have very good like mental health support structures in general.
Sometimes that wasn't even viable. There are so many people, famous celebrities, enshrined through the lens of modern media who could be picked out at their weakest point and put under that Dr. Phil microscope. And the man himself is no exception.
Smoking that Dr. Phil pack, am I right, guys?
Cancel culture. It's a phrase that's been used in online circles to nauseating degrees. I don't want to go too much into detail about it right now, but it's difficult to even give a basic rundown of the definition because there are so many interpretations of it, to the point where some people don't even believe it exists. I think mainly because the sphere of discussion is dominated by super celebrities who are almost immune to ever having their voices silenced anyway. However, our good friend Dr. Phil McGraw has been an outspoken critic of it, appearing on interviews to call out the harmfulness of the culture. But speaking is one thing.
Yeah, for sure. Cancel culture can be, mostly is just weaponized to go after people that other people don't like. So,
does his show reflect that philosophy? Well, to many, cancel culture seems like a new phenomenon, and the presence of mob mentality online definitely highlights its failings. But in many cases, I think it's just a repackaging of something that's long existed, and it's not something that affects everybody equally.
We are in a bubble. We don't want to talk to anyone that doesn't agree with our thinking. And if someone says something that is offensive to our sensibilities, then people go on the attack. And they may choose a wrong word. And instead of saying, maybe messaging them in some way, saying, hey, listen, you may not know it, but that could be offensive to someone. Instead, they start bombarding them with boycott messages on, I hope they die. I'm going to slit your throat in the night. I hate, I mean, just horrible things.
In 1988, when McGraw was actually working as a psychologist,
yeah, everything he's saying is totally fair and true.
He was reprimanded and penalized for hiring a former patient of his for part-time employment. The patient in question also made claims suggesting inappropriate contact by McGraw. However, the board's review did not conclude in the patient's favor on that front. Now, I'm not going to comment on that which is disputed, and there are other serious claims against him that are tied up in legal proceedings which I won't be exploring today. However, I will say that it is Therapy 101 that you do not develop a personal or business relationship with one of your patients outside of your practice. It's not
sure, but that doesn't mean he actually did that.
The board's review did time employment. The patient in question he was reprimanded and penalized for hiring.
Okay.
In 1988, when McGraw was actually working as a psychologist, he was reprimanded and penalized for hiring a former patient of his for part-time employment.
Okay, so
the patient in question also made claims suggesting inappropriate contact by McGraw. However, the board's review did not conclude in the patient's favor on that front. Now, I'm not going to comment on that which is disputed, and there are other serious claims against him that are tied up in legal proceedings which I won't be exploring today. However, I will say that it is Therapy 101 that you do not develop a personal or business relationship with one of your patients outside of your practice.
Sure, that's true, which is a little weird that you're saying that because earlier in this video, you criticized the general mentality from their staffing or whatever, or their staff procedure to not get too close with the guests. So it's like you're like, oh, that's a bad thing, but then like that would align with what you're saying now, or rather your perspective on that doesn't align with this now that you're not supposed to get too close. Second of all, he got them a part-time job. It probably is unprofessional, but that doesn't seem like it's poorly intentioned. It sounds like this person may have needed a job, and he's like, all right, let me get you a part-time job. And that technically violates whatever procedure. It's true. I mean, like, when you work with people in a mental health setting, there's a lot of procedures. Like, for instance, my wife is a behavioral specialist for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Like, there's a lot of things that you're not supposed to or you're not allowed to do because, because of the way that the system is set up. like, for one thing you can't do is you can't hug the people, which is so sad because those people see the direct support professionals as family, right? But if somebody hugged somebody, do you think that they should fucking like die? No, it's like, yeah, that's a very human thing, especially when somebody's like sad. Now, it's still against protocol. It's not something that people should be doing, but like to make it seem like this massively unprofessional thing when the reality is we're all humans doing our best, it just comes off as like you disconnected. So
it's not a healthy dynamic, and the fact that someone seemingly as stoic as McGraw could allow that to happen is certainly a stark reminder that TV hosts are not all they represent sometimes. Now, that's over 30 years ago, and I think one of the uglier aspects of cancel culture is ruining someone's career for historic indiscretions. I believe that, broadly speaking, people deserve the chance to grow and change, and that ruining someone's livelihood is seldom the solution. In his case, the board's solution was for McGraw to be supervised until they were satisfied their conditions were met. To many, this was...
Yeah, that's probably pretty normal.
Like a fair and proportionate response from the board. Would Dr. Phil agree? McGraw has been outspoken on the benefits of his show, and even that he believes it's a fair basis for conflict resolution. So all I'd ask is this: if McGraw genuinely believes in his own approach to therapy, would he have subjected himself to it when he found himself facing serious criticism in 1988? Although I can't look inside his mind, my prediction would be a resounding no. Why? Because he knows better than anyone that you have very little control over how you're going to be perceived or presented. Dr. Phil emphasizes responsibility, but when you as a person have no control over what the TV producers do, what Dr. Phil says, or how your own words may even be twisted and used against you, you can't be responsible for that. Yet you'll believe it because you were the person who chose to go on the show in the first place. Audiences can pretend to be better, but if the performance of YouTube videos tell us anything, it's that people are much more interested in the deterioration than they are the recovery. People are going to be remembered online for decades for often their lowest points in their life, will likely be judged for behavior they may have long corrected, even though in hindsight the flaws of these shows seemed abundantly clear. Most of the longest running shows in this genre, like Springer, Carl, and even Jones, were often the most provocative and controversial. Many of them were rather gross, relied on stereotypes and tropes related to people's backgrounds or identity, and if the same formula was applied with more subtlety with Dr. Phil, it would hardly be surprising as it seems inbuilt with the genre. Even beyond the concept alone, the numerous allegations that Dr. Phil producers went out of their way to make people seem worse than they actually were on screen, isn't that the core of said culture that McGraw would decry in interviews? You see, although I think in many ways provocative with Dr. Phil, it would hardly be surprising as it seems inbuilt with the genre. Even beyond the concept alone, the numerous allegations that Dr. Phil producers went out of their way to make people seem worse than they actually were on screen, isn't that the core of said culture that McGraw...
Oh, okay, I get what he's doing now. I was like not understanding. So what he's trying to... Okay, it's not a bad point. What he's saying is that generally speaking, Dr. Phil speaking out against cancel culture is hypocritical, considering when they bring guests on, they sensationalize their negative actions. And I get what he's saying, that it's happened in the past when they may not necessarily be relevant now. I get what he's saying. It makes a little bit of sense. The problem is that they're clearly going there for a problem. And while the sensationalization is an issue, I say it's like separate from cancel culture for the most part. I mean, people who do cancel culture do sensationalize, but he's trying to offer them a pathway to recovery, so it's not really the same. But I understand the argument that he's trying to make.
Or decry in interviews. You see, although I think in many ways provocative hosts were likely detrimental to guests during their TV appearances, it at least gave audiences some idea of how responsibility can be shared in these situations. I don't think most people are emotionally unintelligent. I think they can recognize when a frenzied situation arises, and it's hard to control. Dr. Phil, on the other hand, built a brand off being the reasonable guy, and it's ingenious optics really, because I think in appearing measured and reasonable, he succeeds in making his guests, who are often put on the spot, look much rather like the opposite. And if the allegations are true, then in many ways, they were much more insidious in their technique than many other hosts who were outwardly, on the surface, more objectionable.
Does he always make his guests look bad, though? Wait.
His guests, who are often put on the spot, look much rather like the opposite. And
wait, what?
Dr. Phil, on the other hand, built a brand off being the reasonable guy, and it's ingenious optics really, because I think in appearing measured and reasonable, he succeeds in making his guests, who are often put on the spot, look much rather like the opposite.
Does he though, or does he do that sometimes? I mean, so the claim here is that Dr. Phil comes off as a reasonable guy and then is able to basically get people to look stupid. That's what he's effectively saying. But is that every instance, or is that just sometimes? I don't watch Dr. Phil. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Red Opinion doesn't either. He's looked at very limited stuff. It's probably his researchers doing the research for him, and I get that. But what I mean, what's going on, Curl? How are you doing, brother? But what I'm asking is, like, is that most episodes, or is there just sometimes that there's a kind of a standoffish thing? Because I don't think that he would have got a reputation of being a reasonable guy that engages in like actual conversation if he was constantly putting people on the defensive and making them feel like standoffish. I just feel like you're trying to make it seem like that's most of what he does when he doesn't. It's most times. Why is it? I feel like it's probably not. I feel like it's probably, I guess I'll have to go watch some Dr. Phil. But maybe. I mean,
And if the allegations are true, then in many ways, they were much more insidious in their technique than many other hosts who were outwardly, on the surface, more objectionable. Everyone looks at social media as the sole cause of cancellation, but TV has been cancelling people for decades, whether that be their social standing amongst their peers or the lives that have been lost due to it. It's happened to high-profile...
Well, yeah, but this is like news articles. I don't think that Dr. Phil's been canceling people at all. So...
people who've been forgotten, and low-profile people who, as far as most of us know, never existed. The internet certainly amplifies elements of it, and it's not healthy, but a lot of people have been looking down on these people struggling before the internet ever began to have any sort of influence in these people's lives. The only way you can come out a winner in the eyes of the audience is if you cooperate with a show's narrative and let the help they offer change you for the better. Places like Turnabout. It's not authentic though, and some people will fall at that hurdle. It's not their fault that an aggressive form of therapy wasn't for them, but the show will sure make it seem like people's lives. The only way you can cut these people shit. The internet certainly amplifies elements of it, and it's not healthy, but a lot of people have been looking down on these people struggling before the internet ever began to have any sort of influence in these people's lives. The only way you can come out a winner in the eyes of the audience is if you cooperate with a show's narrative and let the help they offer change you for the better. Places like Turnabout. It's not authentic though, and some people will fall at that hurdle. It's not their fault that an aggressive form of therapy wasn't for them, but the show will sure make it seem like it.
So then go to a different mental health counselor and don't go on Dr. Phil. Like, no one's forcing you to do it. Again, I understand that Turnabout's not the best. I doubt that's the only program that he promoted. That seems like an extreme case of like putting somebody in like a particular camp for weeks and disconnecting them from their enabling home, which is most likely a big problem with these people as well. But like, you could go to therapy instead of seeing Dr. Phil, or, you know, go there and adhere to it. I mean, you've been defending religiously a fucking mother who took her daughter out of the hospital and helped her get fucking heroin or whatever hard drug she's on, and trying to make it seem like Dr. Phil's an asshole for that. I mean, like, you're missing, you're swinging and missing constantly.
Framing is everything. We live in an era where people seem to empathize more with fictional characters than real people because of it. TV series like Barry or Better Call Saul are far superior psychological analyses of complex characters. And sure, it's hard to find people like that for a tabloid talk show, and you might not want to. But when there are shows that contextualize mass murderers and the literal devil better than you can a drug-addicted teen, then maybe you're doing something wrong. And once these people are off your show, they can do very little to change that image in an industry that favors large companies with lawyers on retainer. Everyone's an actor when they know a camera's on.
Bailey, how are you?
Not good.
Yeah, why is that?
I was told that y'all brought someone here that I explicitly said not to bring.
Yeah, who's that?
My biological mother.
Would you like to leave? Because you can certainly leave, because nobody tells me who to put on my show, including you.
Times are changing. See, you should have showed that first, because now I think Dr. Phil's a little bit of an asshole for that one. But instead, you just showed like in the middle of it, bro. What the fuck? Yeah, that's kind of a duty head move to make, but okay.
Gone the Beeson days where you'd be thrown off or torn apart if you had anything to say against McGraw. People who have been subject to grilling on these shows find themselves with a greater platform to finally express their own perspectives. Ones that would never have been broadcast elsewhere because they didn't fit the narrative. People like Rigoli, whose case would have otherwise been lost to the sands of time, have been able to use their former notoriety to actually amplify their own voice in discussing their experience on the show, and the subsequent treatment they were subjected to. Some online commentators followed suit. YouTuber Jacko has released a very compelling set of videos covering many of these scandals, which I definitely recommend, with further strong contributions coming from many corners of the internet. It's very valiant for Dr. Phil to start discussing cancel culture now in the way that he has. But one can't help thinking where this discussion was when he was publicly roasting parents for not raising children as he thought they should in front of millions of viewers. And
that's just not the same. It's not the same thing as cancel culture. I don't think that you understand. You're drawing like a false comparison. These things are not the same. Him berating shitty parents isn't the same as eternally like canceling somebody over and over and over and over and over and over again and pulling things out of context. These people, like, I don't understand how you think that these two are comparable, but okay.
Roasting those children too. I don't know what he thinks is so different about the online world that makes his cause specifically so righteous.
Well, guys, it's time for you each to take responsibility for what part of this you own. And Diane, you're blaming Ron, and Ron, you're blaming Diane. But let me assure you, nobody is responsible for your feelings and your actions but yourself.
It's ironic, what could prove to be the Achilles heel of Dr. Phil may be the very responsibility that McGraw has continuously advocated for. Once again, one can't help wonder what he would say to himself now if he was a guest on his own show. So I guess I'll say it to him.
Why would he be a guest on the show? Like he's okay. He's clearly not doing things nearly as bad as guests, but maybe, okay, whatever.
Yes, cancel culture is real and can genuinely harm decent people trying to better themselves. I'm glad you care about it, but it's a culture that everyone, yourself included, has participated in at some point in their lives.
No.
Suddenly taking an interest when people have become capable.
This is just like so, like what you're calling what he's doing cancel culture. It's such a weird point, bro. It's just a weak point. It's cancel culture because he brings people on his show do bad things currently, but cancel culture isn't saying you do a bad thing. It's saying you do a bad thing. There's no path to redemption. You're a bad person forever. You should die. And then having disproportionate responses. He's bringing people on and saying, you're doing this bad thing. Let me offer you a pathway, blah, blah, blah. Like, these are so different, right? No, I mean, come on. But okay, you know, I just, maybe I'm the fucking idiot.
Capable of calling you out seems a bit too coincidental. I know it's a trending topic right now, and obviously the phrase has helped amplify the discussion surrounding it. But most of Phil's discourse centers around people who clearly haven't been cancelled, alongside interviews with pop culture and political loudmouths who use these narratives to actually increase their influence.
I can't believe how my fellow liberals are behaving. What is liberal about cancelling everybody and anything that you don't happen to agree with? It's a complete nonsense.
Listen, there's been attempts to cancel me before cancel culture was a thing. I'm an outspoken conservative. That's something that I'm used to.
A lot of large celebrities seem to conflate ordinary people having a platform to respond to them, maybe sometimes rather unpleasantly, with actual threats to their careers, when in many cases they'll never experience that. There are examples where shows and institutes have been pressured to drop certain public figures, and those reasons have been tenuous or driven by personal vendettas. I have never agreed with—
Well, but isn't that what... I mean, I guess his claim would be with the whole association with whatever fucking that shitty service that they worked with for a bit. Would he be like, yeah, people are trying to cancel me for my association kind of a thing? I don't know, whatever.
That, and I'm broadly a
Did he talk to those people? Like, is he a fan of Tory, whatever the fucking that idiot name is? I don't understand.
Free speech person, but even then, it seldom targets celebrities, often academics, smaller companies, those who can't actually afford to fight for themselves. Dr. Phil can. It's clear that he has, and it's clear that he will continue to. However, his takes on cancel culture aren't those of a psychologist, they're those of someone who simply isn't as untouchable as they previously were.
Why do you... Why? Who says what? Okay, sure. Whatever.
But sometimes that is for the best. Just like the Psychology Board's verdict in 1988 wasn't—
It's like this weird, like, oh, he fell off, but because the show's not doing quite as well as it used to. Like, what? Such a weird video, bro. Holy fuck.
Cancel culture, neither is this. At the start of the video, I posed a simple question that was likely being asked by many ambitious producers at the time of Dr. Phil's first appearance on TV. If we combined a talk show host with a specialist in a specific academic area, what would the result be? Well, obviously Dr. Phil is only one possible outcome, but from this one little case study, I'd say that it yielded an impressive, yet hollow spectacle. One that flaunted all the credentials of our savant in question, but had no way to effectively utilize it in a format that maintained a balance between entertainment and humanity, instead leaning into the former at the expense of the latter, in pursuit of those ratings. But I suppose that's not necessarily a surprise. It's what these studios know best, and anything that may allow the competition to have an edge over them should be considered as fair game. It's a survival of the fittest environment, and it's what keeps a lot of people in their jobs. However, just because it's the natural thing to do, it's the right thing to do. And over time, as people's moral compasses have adjusted, the format of Dr. Phil has become unpalatable with more and more viewers. Combined with some allegations that completely contradict the image that Dr. Phil would claim to project, and the continued poor responses made by employees and even McGraw himself, it's not a surprise that some people are switching off or switching over. Dr. Phil taught many how to sympathize with those struggling, but now people are working out how to empathize with them as well. Dr. Phil
I just feel like you're making these really weird claims that, like, he fell off. Like, why? Because people don't watch him nearly as much, but he's still wildly successful? That's just the natural trajectory of anybody's career path. I don't really understand.
Taught many how to seek out help, but now many are learning that there are different types of help, and that there's never a one-size-fits-all solution. In both cases, it makes Dr. Phil's approach seem a little outdated. People's understanding of mental health has evolved greatly in the last couple of decades, and I'm glad. We're garnering a greater understanding of the challenges and troubles that people face. Although we still have a long way to go, I think many have begun to understand how public therapy is a bit of an oxymoron. It's a difficult topic to navigate, and Dr. Phil has likely put a fair few conversations surrounding mental health on the map.
This is like the first decent argument that he's made. It's like, yeah, people, like, the conversation about mental health is changing, and we used to think that stuff like this might have been better off, and that's probably not true, and something like this may not be the best thing to engage with, like, with newer creators. That's the only like decent thing that he said so far. Most of the stuff though is like super fucking like girl clutchy, like, you know, almost pushing speculation as facts, like, over and over again, so it's kind of weird.
Want to void him of any credit whatsoever. We want to live in a world where these topics aren't too difficult to address and pay attention to, but we also need to make sure that those people who may be the center of the discourse can at least represent themselves how they wish to, free of narratives that wish to box them in or present a third party as the hero of the situation. Dr. Phil didn't steal the limelight completely for himself, but it's natural for a TV show to bolster their reputation by crediting themselves with the positive stories and outcomes of guests who have appeared on there. People saying, thank you, Dr. Phil, and viewers...
Well, yeah, I mean, if they give them the financial, or if they give them the pathway to it by, like, providing them a resource, why wouldn't they take credit for it? I don't understand that. Okay.
Clapping while he strolls around because it's just a...
Hey, what's up, I Never? How you doing, brother? How you doing, brother? It's been a while.
another day at the office for him. And I think the contrast of blaming the guest when something does...
Yeah, people keep... Sorry, I didn't see your chat before. Yeah, people keep telling me Andrew Tate was apparently arrested. I'm going to take a look at it after this segment.
...doesn't work out creates a very unsavory juxtaposition. Although there are lots of people and factors that can aid a person's recovery, it's you who has made those changes, and you should never let anyone take that credit away from you. It's not easy, it's a minefield of shit to navigate that may occasionally challenge you to confront...
What is the implication of this? So you're saying if somebody helps you, like, get help, don't thank them because ultimately you're the one who did it? If you're like a struggling drug addict and somebody helps you, why wouldn't you say thank you? It's hard to get people off of drugs. I don't know. It's a weird fucking video.
Bad habits. But even if it's entirely your fault that you landed yourself in shit in the first place and you're merely going back to where you started from, it's still worthy of recognition. Although it's not the entire story, I do think that to make stories more centered around the people who actually are encountering these struggles, you have to decentralize the system that covers these stories. And that's antithetical to the nature of a talk show. That's why I think Dr. Phil is probably too rigid to make that change, because they probably have to scrap the one thing that appealed to audiences in the first place, Dr. Phil himself. He's a knowledgeable and intelligent individual, but he's part of a system that has fallen behind what a lot of people are looking for. And how long he can retain his viewership amongst a manifestation of claims and lawsuits that seem to have greater media presence than ever is a question that will only be revealed with time. Maybe if Dr. Phil does come to an end, we will have some clarity on what happened behind the scenes from people who no longer have a commitment to the show. But who knows when that's going to happen? It's unclear what the future of the Dr. Phil show has in store. But whether it continues for another 20 years or isn't renewed past 2023, its legacy is definitely going to be the source of debate for time to come. However, there are some judgments that can be made. At its best, the producers of Dr. Phil didn't properly make sure their guests stayed in a safe place as they should have. And at their worst, they could have...
Maybe, and it's possible. Maybe you've shown like one instance that might have happened in a speculative way. It's also possible that that's not true. But okay.
Expose guests to the very vices they were claiming to remedy.
They might. Like, I just feel like the people that claim that is like a drug addict. And I'm not trying to be an asshole because he might be telling the truth, but he also might not be. And even before, you seem to don't... the right opinion doesn't seem to have an understanding of people with, like, struggling with addiction. Because when somebody was like, yeah, drug addicts lie a lot. They do. It's unfortunate. He's like, oh, that's a terrible thing to say. It's the fucking truth, man. I don't know what you want me to tell you. Have you ever talked to a drug addict before? It's sad shit, brother. They lie a lot. That's unfortunate. It's not good, but it's life, man.
Possibly intentionally. Now, in most cases, Dr. Phil did provide care for people after their appearance, though there are obvious exceptions. However, is the help that comes after worth the humiliation and conflict that comes during? It's a question worth asking, particularly when that help was structured around its own business model, whether that meant shipping celebrities off to facilities in specific places or sending children to boarding schools or treatment centers in different states.
Well, it's hard to believe that 21 years ago, I made my very first appearance on The Oprah Show. And together, we launched Dr. Phil in 2002.
And it does sadden me in a way, because in watching a lot of episodes, I have seen the positive changes made by the show. I have seen people genuinely find the help they need. I have seen some really harrowing interviews with people who have been through hell. Dr. Phil...
So it sounds like he does some good after all. Oh, we did it. We figured it out. Okay. Cool.
Isn't this universal negative? And I don't want to make it out to be that, but it is a
if that's, I mean, not for nothing, but your entire video screams that. I feel like that's just, you know, either you're not really aware of how biased your video is in one direction, or you were just saying that it's to come off as like reasonable when you may not be as reasonable as you're trying to pretend to be.
Product of an era that isn't as human as it needs to be. I said at the start that as preached on the show, the first step to making a change in your life is acknowledging responsibility, something that many of us have done, but something that many of these shows seem to be allergic to. Possibly for legal reasons, I don't know for sure. Maybe for that reason, they'll never evolve, but I do want to give some words of advice in the instance that that is something they're interested in. If it wants to at least try and keep up with the changing zeitgeist, there needs to be changes. This isn't 2002 anymore. There should be more diligence about how guests are treated on and off the show, and how the show presents their stories. They shouldn't let guests put themselves at risk with substances and alcohol in their care, regardless of the TV that it may engender. They shouldn't crucify teens and youngsters because they're behaving badly. If they want to make a positive difference, put some money aside towards their treatment and protect their identities a little better. They're troubled as anyone, and crafting narratives about how they're the offspring from hell only boxes in their image and challenges them to rebel at one of the most rebellious points in their lives. How they can think that helps is beyond me, and it's definitely something that needs to change in my opinion. Whether they choose to take that advice is their decision. I'm sure McGraw and all will be living alright either way if their net worth is anything to go by. But if they also care about the well-being of their guests, it might just be worth considering. Dr. Phil McGraw and all those behind Dr. Phil did something unprecedented. They took tabloid talk shows to the next level and showed many in the genre that there could be a more dignified element. But not every episode had to end with some sort of row. However, by holding on to some of the more tabloid aspects of the original formula, they eventually fell into the same pitfalls that many other shows of their time had. Whether they'll be remembered for those pitfalls or their success stories is something only time will tell. And maybe they still have time to change that. But it's something whose extent we'll probably only fully know when Dr. Phil is cancelled. The show, that is, not the person. You know, that was the pun. I'm really funny.
Okay.
So yeah, that was the video. Hope you enjoyed. Took a bit to come together, but did come together in the end, and that's what matters. Not too much to discuss today, but I did want to mention one thing. Currently, we're doing a little charity thing on the merchandise website, selling some items. Obviously, Christmas is a lovely time for a lot of people, but not for everyone. My mother put some nice designs together, and we thought, why not?
Okay.
So with some of these charity drives, obviously there is the concern that others are taking a cut, and obviously there are costs for the production of the shirts. What I'm going to do is donate the difference so that how much you pay for the products is how much is being donated. And you get something for it as well, which may have some utility in your life. It's better than buying the new Lad Baby single. And for the Americans who do not understand that reference, ignorance is bliss, my friends. Ignorance is bliss. I'd also like to thank the editors. Credits will be in the pinned comment below. I said description last time, I'm not sure why. Had a bit of a moment. I also need to give a big thanks to the patrons. $10 patrons on screen right now. Big thanks to my $50 patrons, Hypercube, Esther Bedoya, Velarex, and Seri Tish. Thank you very much for your support. It means a lot.
Poggers.
Also, big thanks to the artists whose work contributed to this video. Credits as well below in the pinned comment. If your art appears here, be sure to let me know. Thanks to vidIQ for sponsoring the video. It was genuinely great to work with them, as I did use their app as a smaller creator. Not too much else to add. Big thanks to Starfo for his work on the thumbnail, and Kojak to help put this video together and get it out in a timely fashion. Not sure what else I have to say. I hope you guys have a good festivities wherever you are and whatever you're going through. Take care, guys. Take care. And until then, I'll see you in the next one.
Okay. Cool beans. Okay, that was well, that was a video. That was all right. I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like weird. It was a little weird. A little bit of a anti what's this guy's name? Dr. Phil agenda, but like whatever. I'm sure this came off as very pearl clutchy to me, but hey, you know what? Maybe that's just me, dude. Maybe I'm just a sussy baka.
I want Papa Gut to pee on my face, but just as a friend. There's nothing weird about that. I want him to pee on my face.